The Wyoming Territory, 1878. The land was a vast, broken skillet where the sun fried the earth until it cracked. Miles of gray-green sagebrush stretched out to the horizon, broken only by the jagged teeth of mesas and the distant, ghost-blue spine of mountains that refused to grow any closer, no matter how long the stagecoach rolled toward them. Dust was not just part of the air here, it was the air. It tasted of alkali and old bones, coating the throat and stinging the eyes. Inside the rattling coach, the air was stiflingly hot. The leather curtains were rolled down to keep out the worst of the glare, but they did little to stop the heat that radiated from the roof. Anna Ward sat squeezed into the corner, her body swaying with every violent lurch of the wheels. She clutched a carpet bag on her lap, her knuckles white against the worn fabric. The bag contained everything she owned in this world: 2 plain calico dresses, a Bible she had never opened, a comb with a missing tooth, and $40 stolen from a dead man's strongbox. She told herself her name was Anna Ward. She repeated it in the silence of her mind, over and over, trying to stitch the syllables into her skin so they would stick. I am Anna Ward. I am a widow from Ohio. My husband died of the fever. I've come west to find work, but beneath the rhythm of the wheels, another name whispered like a curse. Rose. It was the name of a girl who wore red silk and painted her lips. A girl who sang for miners and drovers in a smoke-choked saloon in Kansas. A girl who had let a man touch her shoulder and call her pretty until the night he decided that touching wasn't enough, and paying for a drink entitled him to everything else she had. Anna squeezed her eyes shut as the coach hit a deep rut, jarring her spine. She could still feel the weight of the pistol in her hand, the sudden, deafening roar in the small back room, and the look of absolute shock on the saloon owner's face as he crumpled. She had not meant to kill him. She had only meant to stop him. But the West did not care about the intentions of women like her. To the law, and to the men who wrote it, Rose was a whore who had murdered a businessman. She opened her eyes and stared out the gap in the curtains. The landscape was terrifying in its emptiness. There was nowhere to hide out there. A person could walk for days and never find a tree big enough to shadow a grave. The driver shouted something unintelligible from the box above, and the crack of a whip echoed like a pistol shot. The coach banked hard to the left. The road here, if one could call it that, skirted the edge of a dry gulch, a jagged scar in the earth filled with tumbleweeds and sharp rocks. Suddenly, the world tilted. A violent gust of wind, the forerunner of a coming shift in the weather, slammed into the side of the coach just as the lead left horse stepped on a rattlesnake sunning itself in the wagon rut. The horse screamed, a high, terrifying sound, and reared back, throwing the team into chaos. The coach swung wildly, the back wheel slipping over the lip of the gulch. Anna was thrown against the door, her shoulder striking the wood hard. The carpetbag flew from her lap. For a heartbeat, the coach hung suspended, defying gravity, tipping precariously toward the drop. Then, there was the sound of hooves thundering, not the rhythmic trot of the team, but the heavy, driving gallop of a single rider. "Whoa, easy now, you devils, easy!" A voice, deep and ragged as saw-toothed iron, cut through the panic, through the window. Anna saw a blur of motion, a dark horse and a rider leaning dangerously low. The cowboy forced his mount between the gulch edge and the terrified team, risking his own neck to shove the lead horse back toward the center of the trail. He grabbed the bridle of the lead mare, his arms straining, muscles pulling tight beneath a dust-coated shirt. With a groan of wood and metal, the coach slammed back onto all 4 wheels. The driver up top was cursing a blue streak, hauling on the brakes until the vehicle skidded to a halt in a cloud of choking dust. Anna sat frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She waited for the shouting to stop, for her breath to return. The door on her side was wrenched open. "You all right in there, ma'am?" The sunlight was blinding behind him, turning him into a silhouette. Anna blinked, her eyes adjusting. The man standing there was tall, covered in the gray dust of the trail. He wore a low-brimmed hat pulled down to shield his eyes, a faded blue shirt, and leather chaps that looked like they had been dragged through every briar patch in the territory. He extended a hand to help her down. Anna hesitated. The sight of a man's hand reaching for her triggered a reflex of panic so sharp it made her stomach turn. She saw flashbulb memories of grasping fingers, bruises, and the red haze of the saloon. But she could not stay in the hot, dark box of the coach. She took his hand. It was rough, the palm calloused and hard as oak bark, warm and dry. As she stepped down, her boot heel caught on the iron step, and she stumbled forward. He caught her, his grip firm but impersonal, steadying her until her feet found the dirt. "Careful," he said. "The ground is uneven here." Anna looked up, and for the first time, she saw his face clearly. He was not a handsome man in the way the gamblers in Kansas were handsome. His face was a map of the country around them, lean, weathered, and etched with lines that spoke of long days in the sun. A thin white scar ran from his temple down to his jawbone, vanishing into the stubble on his cheek. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were gray, the color of a winter sky before snow, and they watched her with a quiet intensity that felt like he was reading the label sewn into her collar. "Thank you," she said, her voice sounding thin and brittle in the open air. She pulled her hand away quickly, flinching as if she had been burned. The cowboy noticed. His eyes narrowed just a fraction, a flicker of curiosity passing through them, but he stepped back, giving her space. He touched the brim of his hat. "Name is Cole Brannan," he said. "You are lucky the wheel didn't snap. That gulch is deeper than it looks. I am Anna Ward." She forced a smile, the one she had practiced in the mirror of a cheap hotel in Denver. It was a polite, fragile thing, designed to deflect questions. "Well, Miss Ward, welcome to the outskirts of Redemption Creek." He pointed toward the horizon where a cluster of buildings broke the monotony of the plains. Anna looked at the town. It sat huddled against the wind, a collection of timber and adobe that looked like it was holding on by its fingernails. As the driver checked the horses, Anna climbed back into the coach, clutching her bag to her chest. Cole Brannan mounted his horse, a big bay gelding, and rode alongside the stage as it finished the last 2 miles, like a guardian dog herding a stray sheep. Redemption Creek was not much of a redemption. It was a single crooked main street rutted with wagon tracks that had baked into concrete. The buildings were weathered gray wood, their paint scoured away by the relentless wind. Anna saw a general store with a false front, a livery stable that smelled of manure and hot hay, and a small, whitewashed church with a bell tower that leaned slightly to the west. Dominating the town, however, was a brand. She saw it burned into the side of the livery barn, painted on the sign of the general store, and stamped onto crates piled on the boardwalk. A circle with a slash through it. The Stockton brand. It seemed that one man owned this town, or at least held the mortgage on its soul. The stage pulled up in front of a building with a sign that read, "Bailey's Boarding Bath." Anna stepped down, the dust immediately coating the hem of her dress. Cole Brannan was already tying his horse at the rail. He didn't look at her, busy checking his saddle cinch, but she felt his presence like a static charge. She hurried inside. The boarding house smelled of lye soap and boiled cabbage. A woman stood behind a high wooden counter, sorting mail. She was broad-shouldered, with hair the color of steel wool pulled back into a severe bun. Her apron was spotless, a miracle in a town made of dirt. "I need a room," Anna said, approaching the counter. "And I need work." The woman looked up, her eyes sharp and assessing. She looked at Anna's dusty dress, the cheap carpet bag, and the dark circles under her eyes. "I am Mrs. Bailey," the woman said. "I run a respectable house. No drinking, no callers in the rooms, and dinner is at 6 sharp. You say you want work. Yes, ma'am, I can cook, I can clean. I am not afraid of hard work. Mrs. Bailey frowned. "You look like a stiff breeze would blow you over. Child, where's your people? You got a husband?" Anna swallowed the lump in her throat. "He passed. The fever took him in Ohio. I've come west for a fresh start." The lie tasted like ash, but she kept her chin up. "Mrs. Bailey studied her for a long, agonizing moment. The silence stretched, filled only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Anna knew that if this woman said no, there was nowhere else to go. She had $4 left after the stage fare. "I need a girl for the kitchen." "Mrs.," Bailey said finally, her voice dry. "The last one ran off with a drummer selling patent medicine. It pays $3 a week, plus room and board. You will sleep in the attic. It is small and hot in the summer, cold in the winter." "I will take it," Anna said, breathless with relief. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't scrubbed the pots." That evening, the dining room of the boarding house was full. It was a long, narrow room with a single table running down the center, covered in oilcloth. 12 men sat shoulder to shoulder, their heads bent over bowls of beef stew. They were ranch hands, mostly, with a few clerks and travelers mixed in. The air was thick with the smell of meat, coffee, and unwashed bodies. Anna moved around the table with a heavy coffee pot, her hands trembling. She kept her eyes fixed on the cups. Afraid to look anyone in the face, she felt exposed. Every time a chair scraped against the floor or a man laughed too loudly, her shoulders hunched. Cole Brannon was sitting at the far end of the table. He had washed the dust from his face and slicked back his dark hair. Though he still wore the same faded blue shirt, he ate quietly, his movements precise, while the other men traded loud jokes and complained about the foreman. Cole said nothing. Anna reached his end of the table. She poured coffee into his tin cup, her wrist shaking just enough that a splash of dark liquid sloshed onto the oilcloth. "Oh, I'm sorry," she whispered, reaching for a rag at her waist, panic flaring in her chest. She expected him to snap at her. Men didn't like mistakes. Men didn't like clumsy women. "It is fine," Cole said softly. He placed his hand flat on the table, not near her, but in a gesture that seemed meant to calm a spooked horse. He looked up at her, and again she saw that gray, storm cloud gaze. He wasn't looking at the spill, he was looking at her hands, which were shaking uncontrollably. He lowered his voice so the men beside him wouldn't hear. "You are safe here, Miss Ward. It is just coffee." Anna stared at him, unable to breathe. He saw the terror she was trying so hard to plaster over with her widow's story. He didn't know why she was afraid, but he knew the shape of fear when he saw it. She nodded sharply, unable to speak, and fled back to the safety of the kitchen. That night, the attic room was sweltering. It was barely big enough for the narrow cot and a washstand. The roof sloped sharply, forcing her to stoop. A loose shutter banged against the siding outside. A rhythmic, lonely sound, thud, 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 like a heartbeat slowing down. Anna lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the cracks in the plaster ceiling. She was exhausted, her body aching from the journey and the tension of the evening, but sleep would not come. When she closed her eyes, the attic vanished. The smell of lye soap was replaced by the stench of stale beer and cheap perfume. She was back in the saloon in Kansas. The red lanterns cast a sickly, bloody light over the room. She could feel the silk of her dress, tight and restrictive. She heard the heavy tread of boots on the floorboards. The door opening. "Come here, Rose, don't be shy." She felt the rough grip of a hand on her arm, not gentle like Cole's, but bruising, possessive. She felt the hot, sour breath on her neck. She remembered the panic rising like bile, the desperate scramble as he backed her against the washstand, the way her hand had closed around the neck of a whiskey bottle, the sound of glass shattering against bone. The silence that followed was louder than the scream. The man, Silas, falling back, his hands clutching his throat, the blood pulsing out between his fingers, black in the dim light. The look in his eyes wasn't anger anymore. It was profound confusion. "Murderess," the wind whispered outside the shutter. "Whore, killer." Anna rolled over, pressing her face into the scratchy pillow to stifle a sob. She was Anna Ward now. Rose was dead. She had to be dead. But the blood on her hands in the nightmare felt warm and wet, and no matter how much she scrubbed, she couldn't wash the memory of that night away. The next day dawned pale and windy. The routine of the boarding house was a brutal mercy. It left no time for thinking. Anna rose at 4 in the morning to light the cast-iron stove. She hauled water from the pump in the yard until her arms felt like lead. She peeled potatoes until her fingers were stained brown and her skin was raw. The townsfolk of Redemption Creek were a curious lot. Throughout the morning, people found excuses to stop by the kitchen door. The mercantile owner's wife came to borrow a cup of sugar she clearly didn't need, her eyes raking over Anna's dress and hair. A pair of cowboys loitered by the back porch, hoping for a look at the new widow. Anna kept her answers short. Yes, she was from Ohio. Yes, it was a long trip. No, she didn't have family here. She learned to use her grief as a shield. People hesitated to pry too deeply into the life of a grieving widow, fearing it might be bad luck. Around noon, Cole Brannon appeared across the street at the livery stable. He was working with a group of men, loading heavy crates marked with a circle/brand onto a wagon. Anna was sweeping the front porch, trying to make herself invisible, but she couldn't help watching him. He worked with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. He didn't waste energy. He lifted with his legs, threw the bales with a fluid grace, and never seemed to hurry. Yet he did the work of 2 men. A large man rode up on a magnificent black stallion. He wore a fine woolen coat and a hat that cost more than Anna would earn in a year. He sat high in the saddle, looking down at the world with the absolute confidence of a predator who has no natural enemies. This was Stockton. Anna froze. Her broom stilled. Stockton swung down from his horse, tossing the reins to a stable boy without looking. He walked over to where Cole was tightening a strap on the wagon. "Brannon," Stockton said, his voice booming. "That load ready for the north pasture? Just about? Mr. Stockton," Cole replied, straightening up. Stockton's gaze drifted across the street. He saw Anna standing on the porch. His eyes were cold and blue, like chips of ice. They didn't sweep over her. They dissected her. He looked at her waist, her hips, the curve of her neck. It was a look of ownership, of appraisal. "Well now," Stockton said, a slow smile spreading across his face that didn't reach his eyes. "Who is the little bird?" "New girl at Bailey's," Cole said, his voice dropping a register. "Name is Ward. She is a widow." "Widow, is she?" Stockton chuckled. A dry, rasping sound. Mighty young for a widow. Mighty pretty, too. Maybe she needs some comforting. Cole shifted his weight. He stepped slightly between Stockton and the view of the porch. A subtle movement, barely noticeable. "She is here to work." "Boss, she seems skittish." Stockton slapped Cole on the shoulder. "Hard. Skittish just means she hasn't been handled right. Brannon, you ought to know that. A horse, a woman, they all gentle down if you use the right bit." Cole didn't answer. He turned back to the wagon, his jaw set in a hard line. He tugged on the strap so hard the leather creaked. Stockton laughed again and strode into the general store. Anna turned and fled inside, her heart pounding. She knew men like Stockton. The world was full of them. Men who thought their money bought them the right to touch whatever they wanted. By mid-afternoon, the light began to change. The sun was swallowed by a haze that turned the sky the color of a fresh bruise, purple and sickly yellow. The wind, which had been a constant nag all day, suddenly dropped into a dead calm. The silence was heavy, pressing down on the ears. Then the horizon disappeared. A wall of brown earth, stretching from the ground to the heavens, was rolling toward the town. A dust storm. Misses. Bailey shouted from the kitchen. "Anna, the water barrel is near empty. Get to the pump before the dust hits, or we will have grit in the soup." Anna grabbed the buckets and ran out the back door. The pump was 50 yards away, near the edge of the alley. She hooked the heavy iron bucket under the spout and began to pump furiously. The water splashed out, cold and clear. She had just filled the first bucket when the wind hit. It didn't build up. It arrived like a physical blow. A wall of screaming air slammed into her, knocking her sideways. The bucket tipped over, the water instantly swallowed by the thirsty ground. In seconds, the daylight was extinguished. The air turned into a solid mass of flying sand and grit. It stung her face like 1,000 needles. Anna gasped, and the dust coated her tongue, choking her. She squeezed her eyes shut, blinded. She tried to turn back toward the house, but the world had vanished. There was no boarding house, no porch, only a swirling vortex of brown darkness. "Mrs. Bailey!" she screamed, but the wind tore the words from her mouth. She took a step and stumbled over a root. She had lost her sense of direction. Was the house to the left, the right? Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. People died in storms like this, suffocated yards from their own front doors. She stumbled forward, hands outstretched, grasping at nothing. Suddenly, a shape loomed out of the brown haze, a horse rearing up, terrified. Anna screamed and threw herself backward, falling hard into the dirt. The hooves slashed the air inches from her head. Then, a weight descended on her. Someone had jumped from the horse. Strong arms wrapped around her, hauling her up from the ground. She flailed, hitting out in blind terror, thinking it was an attacker. "Easy, it's me! Hold on!" The voice roared in her ear, barely audible over the wind. "Cole." He didn't ask. He didn't hesitate. He wrapped one arm firmly around her shoulders, clamping her against his side. With his other hand, he grabbed the bridle of his horse, which was fighting to bolt. He used his own body as a shield, putting his broad back to the wind, creating a small pocket of shelter for her. "Move!" he commanded. He half-carried, half-dragged her, fighting through the blinding grit. Anna buried her face in his shirt, smelling damp wool, tobacco, and the terrified sweat of the horse. She stumbled, her legs giving out, but his grip held her up. He was a solid, immovable anchor in the chaos. They crashed through a set of double doors. The wind howled in protest as Cole slammed them shut and dropped the heavy wooden bar into place. The silence was sudden and ringing. They were in the livery stable. The air was thick with dust, but still. The only light came from the cracks in the walls, casting eerie beams through the floating moats. The horses in the stalls were whinnying nervously, stomping their hooves. Anna stood trembling, her chest heaving. She was covered in dirt, her hair wild, her dress torn at the hem. Cole stood in front of her. He was breathing hard. Too, his hat was gone, lost to the wind. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat and grit. He didn't let go of her immediately. His hands were still gripping her upper arms, holding her steady. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough. Anna shook her head, unable to speak. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. He looked her over, checking for injuries with a quick, intense scrutiny. Then, realizing he was still holding her, his expression shifted. The adrenaline of the rescue began to fade, replaced by something else, an awareness of the silence, the dim light, and the fact that they were alone. He slowly loosened his grip, but he didn't step away. He was standing too close, in the small, dim space. The world narrowed down to the sound of their breathing. Anna looked up at him. She could feel the heat radiating from his chest. She could feel the strength in the hands that had just plucked her out of the storm like she weighed nothing. For a moment, the fear that ruled her life, the fear of men, of touch, of violence, was suspended. In its place was a strange, terrifying warmth. It started in her belly and spread to her fingertips. She felt safe, not just physically safe from the wind, but safe in a way she hadn't felt since she was a little girl. His chest rose and fell against the loose fabric of his shirt, and without thinking, she imagined leaning her cheek against it. The thought shocked her. Cole seemed to feel it too. His eyes dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. His thumbs brushed the fabric of her sleeves, a tiny, almost unconscious caress. "Anna!" The spell broke. Anna gasped and jerked back, pulling out of his hold. She wrapped her arms around herself, stepping deeper into the shadows. I am fine," she stammered, her voice high and unnatural. "Thank you. You saved me." Cole's hands hovered in the air for a second before dropping to his sides. He cleared his throat and turned away, moving to check on his horse, stroking the animal's neck to calm it. "Just wait here until it blows over," he said, his back to her. "It won't last long." Anna stood in the corner, pressing her back against the rough wood of a stall. Her heart was beating a frantic rhythm, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was confusion. That night, back in her attic room, the wind had died down to a low moan. The town was silent. Anna lay in her narrow bed, her hand resting on her chest, right over her heart. She closed her eyes. But this time, she didn't see the saloon. She didn't see the blood or the broken bottle. She saw the gray eyes of the cowboy. She felt the rough, calloused scrape of his hands on her arms. She felt the solid wall of his body shielding her from the stinging sand. She rolled onto her side, curling her knees to her chest. She had come here to be invisible. She had come here to be a ghost named Anna Ward. Ghosts didn't feel warmth. Ghosts didn't want to be held. But the memory of his heat wouldn't fade. It terrified her more than the saloon, more than the law, more than the storm. Because fear was something she knew how to survive. This was something else. "I have never felt this way," she whispered into the darkness. The words hung in the empty room, unanswered. And for the first time in her life, Anna Ward was afraid of what the morning might bring, not because of what she might lose, but because of what she might want. The weeks that followed the dust storm saw the season turn, the heat of late summer breaking under the weight of an encroaching western winter. It did not arrive all at once, but in a slow, creeping chill that settled into the bones of Redemption Creek. The mornings grew sharp and brittle. Frost began to lace the edges of the water troughs, forming delicate, fern-like patterns that shattered under the blow of a hammer. The distant mountains, once a hazy blue, were now stark white, their peaks biting into the pale sky like polished teeth. Anna Ward settled into a routine that was as hard and unyielding as the frozen ground. Her life became a cycle of labor that left no room for the haunting memories of Kansas to take root. She rose well before the sun, in the pitch black of the attic, her breath puffing out in white clouds as she dressed in the shivering cold. Down in the kitchen, she coaxed the cast-iron stove to life, feeding it wood until the metal ticked and groaned with heat. She hauled water from the pump, the buckets growing heavier as the mud around the well froze into treacherous ridges. She scrubbed pots and pans until the lye soap cracked her knuckles and turned her skin raw and red. It was a hard life, but it was a clean one. There was no silk here. There was no perfume to mask the smell of stale whiskey. There was only the honest scent of wood smoke, baking bread, and the crisp, sage-scented wind. Cole Brannon became a fixture in the periphery of her days. He spent long stretches out on the range, riding the endless miles of fence line for the Stockton Ranch or driving strays down from the high pastures before the deep snow set in. But every 3 or 4 days, he would ride into town for supplies or to mend tack at the livery. Their paths crossed in the small, quiet spaces of the town. Anna would be sweeping the dust from the boarding house porch, and Cole would be walking toward the general store, his spurs chiming softly against the boardwalk. He would touch the brim of his hat, a silent acknowledgement, and she would nod, clutching her broom a little tighter. Sometimes he would step into the kitchen to deliver a sack of flour or a side of beef misses Bailey had ordered from the ranch. These moments were brief, often passing without more than a dozen words exchanged, but the air between them was always charged, heavy with things unsaid. Anna found herself listening for the specific cadence of his boots on the floorboards, a heavy, deliberate stride that was different from the hurried shuffling of the other men. She noticed things about him that she tried not to notice. She saw that he never stared at her with the hungry, devouring look she was used to. He never called her girl or darlin' or sweetheart. He called her Miss Ward, or sometimes simply Anna, spoken with a gravity that made the name feel real, rather than the mask she knew it to be. One Tuesday evening, the boarding house was crowded. The wind was howling outside, driving men indoors to seek the warmth of Mrs. Bailey's stew. Among them was a drifter, a man recently hired by a smaller outfit south of town, who had already consumed more whiskey than food. As Anna moved around the table clearing plates, the drifter leaned back, his face flushed and slack. He reached out as she passed, his hand clumsy. snagging the fabric of her skirt. "Well now," he slurred, looking her up and down with wet, glassy eyes. "You are a fine thing to be hiding in a kitchen. Why don't you come sit on a lap and warm up? Little widow." The table went quiet. Anna froze. The old terror, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She pulled at her skirt, but his grip was tight. "Please, let go," she whispered, her voice failing her. The drifter laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Don't be shy. I got a silver dollar in my pocket, says you can be friendly if you try." From the end of the table, a chair scraped back. It was a slow, deliberate sound, metal legs dragging against wood. Cole Brannan stood up. He did not shout. He did not draw the heavy Colt revolver that hung at his hip. He simply walked the length of the table, his movements fluid and calm. He stopped behind the drifter's chair. "Let her go," Cole said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. It was a voice that expected to be obeyed, a tone born of hard years and harder choices. The drifter blinked, looking up at Cole. "Who are you, the girl's keeper?" "I am the man telling you to let go of the lady's dress," Cole said. "And I am the man telling you to finish your meal outside." The drifter sneered, starting to rise, his hand dropping toward his own belt. Before he could clear leather, Cole's hand moved. It was a blur of motion. He caught the man's wrist in a grip that turned the drifter's knuckles white, pinning his hand to the table. Cole leaned down, his face close to the other man's ear. "Don't make a mistake you won't live to fix," Cole murmured. For a long, tense heartbeat, violence hung in the air, thick as smoke. Then, the drifter's eyes wavered. He saw the scar on Cole's face, the dead flat look in his gray eyes, and the fight drained out of him. He grunted, pulling his hand free from Anna's skirt. "Just having some fun," he muttered, stumbling to his feet. No need to get riled. He grabbed his hat and slunk out the door, the wind slamming it shut behind him. Anna stood rooted to the spot, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was trembling, a mix of profound relief and a new, sharper fear. She had seen men fight over her before, in the saloon. It always ended in blood. It always ended with her being blamed. She looked at Cole. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at her. His jaw was tight, a muscle jumping in his cheek, but his eyes were gentle. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Anna nodded, unable to trust her voice. She gathered the plates with shaking hands and fled to the safety of the kitchen. She leaned against the wash basin, breathing hard, realizing that for the first time in her life, a man had used his strength to stop a violation, not to commit one. 2 days later, the encounter at the pump happened. It was late afternoon, the sky a bruised purple over the mountains. Anna was filling the evening buckets. The wind was whipping her hair across her face, masking the sound of footsteps on the gravel. She was lost in thought, watching the water spill from the iron spout, when a shadow fell over her. "Here, let me get that heavy one." The voice was right behind her ear. Anna gasped, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a sob. She spun around, her elbow knocking into the full bucket. It tipped, splashing icy water down the front of her apron and onto her boots. She stumbled back, her hands flying to her throat in a defensive posture, eyes wide with panic. Cole stood there, his hands raised halfway, frozen. He had approached quietly, meaning only to help, but the reaction he had provoked was visceral. He saw the way her pupils had blown wide, the way her body had coiled to run or fight. "I am sorry," he said quickly, stepping back to give her room. "I didn't mean to spook you. Anna, I thought you heard me." Anna stared at him, her chest heaving. It took a long moment for her mind to catch up with her instincts. It was just Cole. It was just the cowboy with the sad eyes. I didn't hear," she stammered, embarrassed heat rising in her cheeks. "I was wool gathering." Cole crouched down to retrieve the fallen bucket. "I should have whistled or stomped my boots. I forget sometimes that I walk quiet. Habit." He reached for the bail of the bucket at the same moment Anna reached down to right it. Their hands met in the cold, spilled water. His fingers were rough, the skin calloused and warm despite the chill air. Her fingers were smaller, red from the cold, trembling slightly. For a second, neither of them pulled away. The contact was electric, a sudden jolt of connection that made the rest of the world fall away. Anna looked at his hand covering hers, seeing the strength in his wrist, the scars on his knuckles. She looked up and found him watching her. There was no mockery in his face, only a deepening concern. He knew. She could see it in his eyes. He realized that her jumpiness wasn't just nerves. It was the reflex of a hunted animal. He slowly withdrew his hand, allowing her to take the bucket handle. Though he didn't stand up immediately. "You have got a heavy load to carry, Miss Ward," he said quietly. And she knew he wasn't talking about the water. He stood then, lifting the other bucket for her and carrying it all the way to the kitchen door, leaving her standing in the yard with wet boots and a heart that felt too large for her chest. That evening, as Anna dried the last of the supper dishes, Mrs. Bailey bustled in to check the pantry. The older woman paused, wiping her hands on her apron, and looked at Anna with a shrewd, motherly expression. "You are a hard worker." "Anna, Mrs." Bailey said, "I will give you that. But you are jumpy as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs." Anna kept her eyes on the plate she was drying. "I am sorry, ma'am. I am not used to the wind yet." "Mrs." Bailey hummed, a skeptical sound. "It is not the wind you are flinching at. I saw you when that drifter grabbed your skirt. And I saw how Mr. Brannan stepped in." Anna stopped scrubbing. "Listen to me, girl. Mrs." Bailey continued, her voice lowering. "A woman alone out here. She draws attention whether she wants it or not. Men like Stockton. They see a woman without a man, and they think she is open range. Stockton does not like being refused. You keep your head down, and be careful who you let stand up for you. Debts get called in, one way or another." Anna nodded, her stomach twisting into a tight knot. She knew what it was to be owned. She knew the way powerful men looked at things they wanted to possess. The warning hung in the air, smelling of lie and foreboding. On Sunday, Mrs. Bailey insisted Anna attend the church service. "It will do you good." "Mrs." Bailey said, adjusting her bonnet. "And it will help the town see you as a proper widow, not just a stranger." The church was a small, drafty building at the end of the street, little more than a barn with a steeple. Inside, it smelled of pine sap and damp wool coats. The pews were rough-hewn planks that snagged on fine fabric. Anna sat in the back row, huddled in her shawl, feeling the weight of the town's curiosity. She could feel their eyes on the back of her neck, the shopkeepers, the wives, the ranch hands. They were weighing her, judging the cut of her dress, the way she held her head. Cole was there too. He stood near the door, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt that seemed too tight across his shoulders. He didn't look at the preacher. He looked at the floor, or out the window. But once, halfway through the reading of the scriptures, he turned his head and found Anna. Their gaze connected across the sea of bonnets and Stetson hats. It was a lifeline, in a room full of strangers who saw only a widow or a curiosity. Cole looked at her and saw her. It was a small anchor, holding her steady when she felt like she might float away on a tide of panic. Then the hymn began. The pianist, a thin woman with bony fingers, struck a chord on the out-of-tune upright piano. The congregation rose to sing Rock of Ages. The melody drifted through the cold air, tinny and hollow, but to Anna, it didn't sound like a church hymn. The slightly sour notes of the piano transported her instantly back to the saloon. She could smell the tobacco smoke. She could hear the clinking of glasses. She could hear the man who played the piano there, a man who played this same tune in a mocking, upbeat tempo while men bid on the women like cattle. "Let me hide myself in thee." Anna's throat closed up. The walls of the church seemed to shrink, leaning in on her. The voices of the congregation warped into the leering shouts of the miners. She couldn't breathe. The air was too thin, too hot. She dropped her hymnal. It hit the floor with a clap that sounded like a gunshot. Without a word, she turned and fled. She pushed past the heavy oak doors and stumbled out into the biting cold of the morning. She leaned against the rough clapboard siding of the church, gasping for air, tears pricking her eyes. The cold wind burned her cheeks, but it felt clean. It felt real. The church door opened and closed softly. Heavy boots crunched on the frost-hardened ground. Anna wiped her eyes frantically, turning her face away. Just needed some fresh air. Cole's voice said, "It gets close in there. He didn't come too close." He leaned against the porch railing a few feet away, taking a pouch of tobacco from his pocket and beginning to roll a cigarette with steady, practiced fingers. He didn't look at her. He gave her the dignity of her privacy while standing guard over it. I am fine," Anna managed to whisper. The music, it was just loud. Cole struck a match on his boot heel, cupping the flame against the wind. He took a drag, the smoke curling away into the gray sky. "You don't like crowds much, do you, Anna?" "No," she admitted. "I don't, neither do I." He looked up at the sky, watching a hawk circle in the distance. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't the heavy, awkward silence of the kitchen. It was companionable. "Someone hurt you bad back where you came from, didn't they?" The question was soft, barely louder than the wind. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, stated with the same calm certainty as if he had said it looks like snow. Anna froze. Her heart stopped its frantic beating and settled into a cold, heavy rhythm. She looked at his profile, the scar, the hard line of his jaw, the sadness around his eyes. He wasn't asking for gossip. He was asking because he recognized the damage. She gave a small, bitter laugh that sounded like dry leaves skittering on stone. That is one way of putting it. She didn't offer more. She didn't tell him about the man she killed or the name she had buried, but the pain in her voice was raw and bleeding. Cole nodded slowly. He didn't press. He didn't ask who or why. He simply exhaled a stream of smoke and said, "Well, you are in Redemption Creek now. The wind here, it has a way of scouring things clean, if you let it." 2 weeks later, the first true storm of the winter hit. It didn't start with a gradual decline. It slammed into the valley with the fury of a trapped animal. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. The sky turned a flat, featureless white, and the snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in hard, driving pellets that stung like buckshot. Stockton, sensing the danger to his herds, pulled his men back to the main ranch house 5 miles out, but Cole stayed in town. He told the foreman he needed to wait for a shipment of wire, but the truth was, he couldn't bring himself to leave the town unprotected, or perhaps one specific person in it. By nightfall, the wind was howling like a banshee. Visibility dropped to nothing. From the porch of the boarding house, Anna could barely see the lights of the livery stable across the street. She was struggling with the laundry line on the side porch. The wind had torn one end loose, and the heavy, frozen sheets were whipping violently, threatening to snap the line and fly away into the dark. "I have to get them down," she muttered to herself, fighting the gale. Her fingers were numb, fumbling with the icy knot. The wind gusted, a sudden, violent shove. Anna's foot slipped on a patch of ice that had formed on the edge of the porch steps. She cried out as her feet went out from under her. She flailed, grabbing at the air, bracing for the hard impact of the frozen ground, but the impact never came. A dark shape lunged out of the swirling snow. Strong arms caught her around the waist, halting her fall with a jarring thud. Momentum carried them both backward, crashing against the sturdy wooden post of the porch roof. Cole grunted as his back took the impact, absorbing the blow for her. They stood there, tangled together in the roaring dark. Cole's arm was braced tight behind her back, pinning her to him to keep her upright. His other hand was gripping the porch rail. Their bodies were pressed flush against each other from chest to knee. Anna's breath came in quick, panicked bursts. She could feel the heat of him through her coat. She could feel the hard wall of his chest, the thud of his heart beating a rapid rhythm against her own. Snow was melting on his face, running down the scar on his cheek like tears. For a heartbeat. Time stopped. The storm raged around them, a chaotic vortex of white and black. But in the small space between their bodies, there was a sudden, terrifying stillness. Anna looked up at him. His face was inches from hers. She saw the gray eyes darken, the pupils dilating. She saw the way his breath hitched. He didn't pull away. He held her there, suspended in the storm, his grip firm and protective, yet possessing a hunger that terrified her. She didn't pull away either. Her hands were clutching the lapels of his sheepskin coat. For the first time, she didn't want to run. She wanted to lean in. She wanted to bury her face in his neck and let the warmth consume her. Then, the wind shrieked, tearing a sheet loose from the line with a sound like a whip crack. Cole blinked, the spell breaking. He gently set her upright, his hands lingering on her waist for a fraction of a second too long before dropping away. "Get inside," he roared over the wind. "This is no weather for you." He turned and fought the laundry line, wrestling the frozen sheets down with quick, angry movements, bundling them into her arms before practically shoving her through the door. The storm worsened as the night wore on. It was a blizzard, the kind the old-timers talked about for years. The snow piled up in drifts against the buildings, burying the boardwalks. Around midnight, disaster struck the boarding house. The old chimney, stressed by the fierce wind and the intense heat of the stove, developed a crack. Smoke began to pour into the upper rooms, thick and choking. "Fire! Missus!" Bailey screamed, banging on doors. "Everyone out! The chimney is blocked!" Coughing and stumbling, the guests spilled out into the snowy street. It was impossible to stay in the house. The risk of the roof catching fire or the smoke suffocating them was too great. The livery stable, across the street, was the only large, solid structure with a safe stove. "Get them to the loft," Cole shouted, appearing out of the whiteout like a ghost. He grabbed Anna's arm, guiding her through the knee-deep snow. The wind tried to knock them down, but he held her fast, his body blocking the worst of the gale. The livery was crowded with shivering townsfolk and travelers. Misses. Bailey organized the women near the potbelly stove in the tack room, but there wasn't enough space. "We will have to take the loft," Cole told Anna. They climbed the ladder to the hayloft. It was dimly lit by a single lantern hanging from a rafter. The air smelled of sweet, dry hay and horses. Several other stranded travelers were already asleep in the far corners, snoring softly. Cole kicked together a pile of loose hay, fashioning a rough pallet. He spread his heavy saddle blanket over it, then tossed his sheepskin coat on top. "It is not a feather bed," he said, his voice low, "but it is warm." Anna sat down, shivering violently. The cold had seeped into her marrow. Cole sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Outside, the wind battered the barn, making the heavy timbers groan. But inside, it was quiet. They sat in the flickering amber light, wrapped in blankets. The intimacy of the space was overwhelming. Here, in the dark, stripped of their daily roles, waitress and cowboy, they were just a man and a woman hiding from the cold. Cole took a flask from his pocket and offered it to her. "Brandy. It will help the chill." Anna took a small sip, the liquid burning a pleasant path down her throat. She handed it back, her fingers grazing his. "How did you get that scar?" she asked suddenly. The question had been on her tongue for weeks. Cole touched the line on his cheek unconsciously. "Barbed wire," he said, and a difference of opinion about where a fence line should go. He took a drink, staring into the shadows. "I have got others," he said quietly. "From bullets, from knives. I was a hired gun for a long time." "Anna, before I rode for Stockton, I fought in the range wars down in Lincoln County. I did things I am not proud of. I took money to scare men off their land. Sometimes worse." He turned his head to look at her, his expression unguarded. "I spent a lot of years being a bad man because I thought that was all I was good for." Anna looked at him, seeing the guilt that lay beneath his quiet strength. "Do you ever wish you could wipe it clean?" she whispered. "The slate, every single day." Cole answered. His voice was rough with emotion. Their eyes locked. In the dim light, the air between them became charged with a shared hurt, a resonance of damaged souls recognizing each other. It was a dangerous moment. It was the moment where empathy turned into longing. Anna shivered, a tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. "You are freezing," Cole murmured. He shifted closer. He didn't grab her. He didn't assume. He moved slowly, giving her every chance to stop him. He lifted his arm and extended his coat, creating a shelter. "Come here." It was an offer, not a command. Anna hesitated. Every instinct she had honed over the last 3 years screamed at her to keep her distance. Men were dangerous. Closeness meant pain. But she looked at his hand, the hand that had saved her from the coach, from the storm, from the drunk. It lay open on the blanket, palm up, a request. She inched closer. She turned her back to him and leaned back until her shoulders rested against his chest. Cole let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. He lowered his arm over her, pulling the blanket tight. His arm rested heavy and warm across her, his hand falling on the blanket near her waist, not quite touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat of his palm. He held still, breathing shallowly, terrified that if he moved, she would bolt. He wanted to pull her tighter, the desire to wrap her completely in his strength, to bury his face in her hair, was a physical ache in his chest, but he forced his muscles to stay relaxed. Anna lay awake, staring into the darkness of the rafters. She could feel the steady, slow rise and fall of his chest against her back. She could feel the solidness of him, a wall between her and the world. She realized, with a jolt of panic that stopped her breath, that she wanted him there. She didn't just tolerate his presence, she craved it. The safety of his body lit a fire in her blood that was more frightening than the freezing wind outside. She bit her lip, fighting the urge to turn around and press her face into his shirt. She had spent years running from men, running from the feeling of hands on her body. And now, the only thing she wanted was for his arm to tighten, for his hand to close the distance. "I have never felt this way," she thought, the words echoing in her mind like a sentence. "I have never wanted to be held. I have never wanted to stay." A tear leaked from the corner of her eye and tracked into her hair. "And I don't know how to survive it." The storm passed, but it left the world changed. Redemption Creek lay encased in a shell of ice. The blizzard had scoured the town clean, burying the mud and the refuse under 2 feet of pristine white. But the beauty was a deception. The cold that followed was a physical weight, pressing down on the roofs and seeping through the cracks in the clapboard walls. The sun came out, blindingly bright and distant, offering no heat, only a glare that burned the eyes. Life in the boarding house narrowed down to a single, brutal purpose: staying warm. Anna Ward spent her days fighting the frost. The water in the kitchen barrels froze solid overnight, requiring her to break the ice with a heavy iron ladle before she could fill the kettle. The windows were patterned with frost ferns so thick they obscured the street. Firewood became the most precious currency in the territory, consumed by the voracious cast-iron stoves that roared day and night. Cole Brannon was in town more often now. The heavy snows had made range work nearly impossible, and Stockton had pulled most of his crew back to the main ranch, leaving a few men to watch the livery and the town interests. One bitter Tuesday morning, Anna was behind the boarding house, struggling with a piece of knotted pine. The woodpile was dwindling, and Mrs. Bailey had a cough that rattled deep in her chest, demanding a constant fire. Anna swung the heavy splitting axe, but her aim was off. The blade glanced off the frozen knot, sending a shock wave up her arms that nearly jarred her teeth loose. "Here, you are holding it too high on the handle?" Cole's voice came from the alleyway. He had been checking his horse's shoes at the blacksmith shed next door. He walked over, his breath puffing in white clouds. He didn't take the axe from her immediately. Instead, he stood behind her, close enough to block the biting wind. "Spread your feet," he instructed, his voice low and rough, like you are bracing for a shove. "Slide your right hand down the handle as you swing. Let the weight of the iron do the work." Anna adjusted her stance. She felt self-conscious. aware of her clumsy hands and the oversized coat Mrs. Bailey had lent her. Cole watched, his hands tucked into the pockets of his sheepskin coat. "Try it again," he said. Anna lifted the axe, focused on his instructions, and brought it down. This time, the blade bit deep, splitting the log with a satisfying crack. "Better," Cole said, nodding. "But don't fight the wood. If it fights back, walk around it." He stepped forward then, taking the axe from her hands. His gloves were worn leather, stained with oil and labor. "Let me get the big ones," he said. "You stack." They worked in a rhythm that felt surprisingly domestic. Cole swung the axe with an easy, fluid power, destroying the stubborn logs that had defeated her. Anna gathered the split wood, stacking it against the dry side of the shed. The physical labor warmed her blood, driving the chill from her fingers. At one point, Cole swung at a particularly twisted stump. The blade stuck fast. He tugged at it, grunted, and put his boot against the log to lever it free. The handle was slick with frost, and his hand slipped. He stumbled back, nearly landing in a snowdrift, and let out a string of colorful curses that involved the ancestry of the tree and the questionable morals of the axe-maker. Anna clapped a hand over her mouth, but a laugh escaped. It was a bright, startled sound, cutting through the cold air like a bell. Cole froze. He looked at her, his eyebrows raised in surprise. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched. "Go ahead," he said dryly. "Laugh at a man nearly breaking his neck for your kindling." "I am not laughing at you," Anna managed, her eyes crinkling. "I am laughing at the tree. I think it won." Cole pulled his hat lower, hiding a smile. "It got a lucky shot in, that is all." He yanked the axe free with a final grunt. For a moment, they just stood there, the pile of wood between them. Anna's cheeks were flushed with exertion and the rare humor of the moment. That laugh felt fragile, a piece of crystal that had somehow survived a rock slide. She saw Cole looking at her, not with the guarded pity he often wore, but with a quiet appreciation, as if he had just discovered she could speak a language he liked. The peace did not last. 2 days later, a wagon rattled into Redemption Creek. It was a peddler's wagon, painted a garish yellow that had peeled to reveal gray wood underneath, hung with pots, pans, and bolts of calico cloth. The driver was a man named Ezra Pook. He was a wiry creature with shifting eyes and a beard that looked like a patch of dead scrub grass. Anna was wiping down the front window of the dining room when the wagon pulled up. She watched idly as Pook climbed down, shaking the road dust from his coat. He looked up at the boarding house, scanning the windows with the predatory gaze of a man looking for weakness. His eyes locked on hers through the glass. Anna stopped breathing. It had been 3 years, but she remembered him. He had been a regular at the Golden Slipper in Kansas. He wasn't a miner or a cowboy. He was a scavenger who sold cheap jewelry to the saloon girls and carried gossip between towns like a disease. Ezra Pook stared. He tilted his head, squinting. Then, a slow, terrible smile spread across his face. He tipped his greasy hat to her through the glass. Anna jerked back from the window, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "He knows," she thought. "He knows." She spent the rest of the afternoon hiding in the kitchen, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, but she couldn't hide forever. The wood box needed filling. When she stepped out the back door in the twilight, Pook was waiting. He was leaning against the corner of the building, picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. "Evening. Ma'am?" he said, his voice oily and soft. Anna clutched her shawl tighter. "I don't need any pots." "Mister? Oh, I think you might need something I have got," Pook said. He pushed off the wall and took a step toward her. "You look familiar to me. You have got the look of a girl I saw once in Kansas, a singer, went by the name of Rose. I am Anna Ward," she said, her voice shaking. "I am a widow from Ohio. Is that a fact?" Pook scratched his chin. "Because this Rose, she was a firecracker, got herself in a heap of trouble, killed a man, they say, left him bleeding on the floor and ran off with a night's take. There is a bounty, I hear, not a big one, but enough to buy a new wagon. Terror, cold and absolute, washed over her. 'Please,' she whispered. Please, just leave me be. Pook grinned. His teeth were yellow in the gloom. Now, I am a reasonable man. Miss Ward, I ain't the law. I am just a businessman, and information is a commodity. Maybe if a person was to make it worth my while, I could forget I ever saw a ghost in Wyoming. He didn't name a price. He didn't have to. The threat hung in the air, a noose tightening around her neck. I have no money, Anna said, tears stinging her eyes. Pook shrugged. People in this town have money. Maybe I will ask around, see if anyone is missing a rose. He walked away, whistling a tune that was popular in the saloons 3 years ago. Anna sank down onto the back step, burying her face in her hands. The walls of the canyon felt like they were closing in, crushing her. The next morning, Mrs. Bailey bustled into the kitchen, looking flustered and pleased. We have an invitation. Anna, she announced, waving a piece of heavy cream-colored paper. Mr. Stockton is hosting a dinner at the ranch tonight for the prominent citizens. He has specifically asked for the ladies of the boarding house to attend. He says he wants to welcome the new widow properly. Anna dropped the potato she was peeling. I can't go. Mrs. Bailey frowned. Don't be foolish, mister. Stockton is the most powerful man in this territory. If you insult him, you insult the town. You need friends here. Anna, this is a chance to secure your place. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. Cole was in the livery when he heard the news. He spat into the straw, his face darkening. He is inviting her to the big house? Cole asked the stable boy. That is what the foreman said. Fancy dinner. Even opened a barrel of wine. Cole clenched his jaw until it ached. He knew Stockton. He knew the rancher collected people the way he collected thoroughbred horses, to break them, to ride them, and to show them off. And he knew that Stockton had been watching Anna with a hunger that had nothing to do with hospitality. Cole saddled his horse. He had to be there. He was just a hand, not a guest, but he would find a reason to be in the house. The Stockton ranch was a fortress of wealth in a landscape of poverty. The main house was 2 stories of cut stone and timber, with glass windows that must have cost a fortune to ship from the east. Inside, it was warm, lit by crystal chandeliers that cast a golden glow over polished mahogany furniture. Anna wore her best dress, a simple gray wool that she had mended carefully. She felt drab and small next to the merchants' wives in their silk and lace. Stockton met them at the door. He was a large man, taking up space with an arrogant ease. He wore a velvet vest and a clean white shirt. Mrs. Bailey, he boomed, kissing the matron's hand. And Mrs. Ward, you do my home honor. He took Anna's hand. His palm was smooth, not calloused like Cole's. He held her hand a second too long, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. You are trembling. My dear, Stockton said softly. No need to be afraid. You are among friends here. Dinner was an ordeal. The table was laden with roast beef, potatoes swimming in butter, and vegetables that must have been kept in a root cellar. It was more food than Anna had seen in months, but she couldn't swallow a bite. She sat on Stockton's right. Throughout the meal, he kept up a steady stream of charming conversation, telling stories of how he built his empire. But under the table, his heavy boot pressed against hers. When she shifted her legs away, he moved his foot, trapping her ankle against the chair leg. She looked up, startled. Stockton was smiling at the banker's wife, raising his wine glass, but his eyes flicked to Anna, cold and amused. He enjoyed her discomfort. He enjoyed the power of making her squirm while everyone else thought he was a gentleman. Ezra Pook was there, eating in the kitchen with the staff, but halfway through the meal, he was summoned to the dining room to deliver a message. He leaned down and whispered in Stockton's ear. Anna watched, paralyzed. She saw Pook's eyes slide toward her. She saw Stockton's expression shift. The amusement in his eyes sharpened into something more dangerous. Calculation. He looked at Anna not just as a pretty woman, but as a woman with a secret. A woman who could be leveraged. After dinner, the men retired to the library for cigars. Stockton stopped Anna in the hallway. A word. Mrs. Ward. Or should I call you Rose? The blood drained from Anna's face. She grabbed the back of a chair to keep from falling. Stockton opened the door to the library and ushered her in, closing it firmly behind them. The room smelled of leather and expensive tobacco. "My friend, Mr. Pook tells me an interesting story," Stockton said, walking to his desk and pouring a brandy. "He tells me there is a warrant for a woman of your description in Kansas. Murder. It was self-defense," Anna whispered. "He was hurting me." Stockton turned, swirling the amber liquid in the glass. "The law does not always see it that way, especially for a woman of your profession." He walked toward her, slow and predatory. "You are in a precarious position, my dear. The sheriff in this town draws his pay from my accounts. If I tell him to arrest you, you will be in irons before sunrise. And then you go back to Kansas to hang." Anna began to shake. "What do you want?" Stockton stopped inches from her. He reached out and touched a stray curl of hair on her neck. She flinched, but he didn't pull away. "I'm a lonely man. Anna, I have a big house, but it is cold in the winter. I could use some warmth." He let the implication hang there. "I can offer you safety," he continued, his voice lowering to a husky murmur. "You come here. You live at the ranch. You make me happy. And in return, the sheriff never sees that warrant. Mr. Pook moves on to the next town with a heavier purse. You never have to scrub another floor or freeze in that attic again." He was offering to make her his mistress. He was offering to turn her back into exactly what she had run away from. A thing to be owned. "No," she said. Stockton blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said no. I won't do it." Stockton's face hardened. The charm evaporated, leaving the brutal bedrock beneath. "You think you have a choice?" he sneered. "You are a whore who killed a man. You have no standing here. I am a person," Anna said, her voice trembling but rising in volume. "And I would rather hang than belong to you." Stockton grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging in. "You will regret that. The West is a hard place for a woman with dirty secrets. You will find that out soon enough." He shoved her away. "Get out of my house." The ride back to town was silent. Anna sat in the wagon next to Mrs. Bailey, staring at the snow, feeling the cold seep into her soul. She knew the clock had started ticking. It didn't take long. By the next afternoon, the poison had spread. Pook had been busy. He hadn't just told Stockton. He had told the saloon, the general store, and the blacksmith. He embellished the story, turning the self-defense into a robbery, turning Rose into a seductress who lured men to their deaths. Anna walked down Main Street to the bakery, and the silence that followed her was loud. Two women standing on the boardwalk turned their backs as she passed, pulling their skirts aside as if she were contagious. A group of men outside the saloon stopped talking and watched her, their gazes heavy and insolent. "Look at the sway on her," one muttered, loud enough to be heard. "You can tell she is used to walking for money." Anna kept her head down, clutching her shawl, her face burning. That evening, the atmosphere in the boarding house dining room was toxic. The usual polite nods were gone. The men ate quickly, eyes darting to her and then away, whispering behind their hands. Cole came in late. He looked tired, dust in the lines of his face. He sat at his usual spot, sensing the tension immediately. A new ranch hand, a man named Dutch who had come in with the cattle drive, was sitting across from him. Dutch was drunk and feeling mean. "Hey, sweetheart," Dutch called out as Anna poured coffee. His voice was slurred. "How much for a private pour? I hear you used to charge $1 for a song. What does $1 get me here?" The room went dead silent. Anna froze, the coffee pot shaking in her hand. Cole set his cup down. It made a sharp clink on the table. "Shut your mouth, Dutch," Cole said. Dutch laughed, looking around for support. "What? It is honest trade. Everyone knows she is a Kansas whore. Stockton said so himself, said she is no better than she ought to be." Cole moved. It wasn't the slow, deliberate movement of the library confrontation. It was an explosion. He vaulted over the bench, launching himself across the table. His fist connected with Dutch's jaw with a sickening crunch. The bench overturned, Coffee flew everywhere. Dutch roared and grappled with Cole, dragging him to the floor. They crashed into the sideboard, shattering plates. It was a brawl, messy and violent. Cole wasn't fighting with technique. He was fighting with a rage that had been building for weeks. He took a heavy blow to the eye that split the skin, blinding him with blood. But he didn't stop. He hammered his fist into Dutch's ribs, his face driving the man back. Enough! The shout came from the doorway. It was the sheriff, backed by Stockton. Cole stood up, breathing hard, blood dripping from his chin. Dutch was groaning on the floor, spitting teeth. Stockton looked at the wreckage. He looked at Cole, his eyes filled with contempt. Fighting over a woman. Brannon? Stockton spat. You are softer than I thought. She deserves respect. Cole rasped, wiping the blood from his eye. She deserves what she earns. Stockton countered. I told you, stay away from her. You work for me. That means you side with me. I ride for the brand, Cole said, his voice steady. But I don't ride for a man who ruins a woman to soothe his own pride. Stockton stepped close, his voice a low hiss. You are on thin ice, cowboy. You remember who keeps you out of jail? You remember the blood on your own hands. Cole didn't flinch, but his jaw clenched so hard the muscle jumped. Stockton turned and walked out, leaving Cole standing in the ruins of the dining room, his loyalty to the ranch fractured beyond repair. The next morning, the final blow fell. Mrs. Bailey called Anna into the parlor. The older woman looked tired, her face gray. She wouldn't meet Anna's eyes. I am sorry, Anna, she said. I truly am. You are a good worker, but business is business. Mrs. Bailey, please, Anna begged. I didn't do what they said. It doesn't matter what you did. Mrs. Bailey said, looking at her hands. It matters what people think. The ladies of the church, they say they won't buy bread from a house that harbors a woman of loose morals. Half my boarders threatened to leave this morning. I can't lose this house. Anna, it is all I have. She placed $2 on the table. This is your pay. You have until noon to clear your things. Anna walked up the stairs to the attic like a woman walking to the gallows. She packed the carpet bag, the 2 calico dresses, the comb, the Bible. It was all she had. She had tried to build a life, and it had been kicked down like a sandcastle. She went down to the kitchen one last time to drink a cup of water. She stood by the cold stove, her hands clutching a chipped mug, and the dam finally broke. She didn't sob. She just stood there, tears sliding silently down her face, shaking with the absolute desolation of being alone in a world that wanted her dead. The back door opened. Cole stood there. His left eye was swollen shut, purple and angry. His lip was split. He looked like he had been dragged behind a horse, but he was standing tall. He saw the carpet bag on the table. He saw the way Anna was shaking. He closed the door softly and walked over to her. They put you out? He asked. Anna nodded. She couldn't speak. Cole took off his hat. He ran a hand through his hair, looking around the kitchen as if searching for a solution in the cupboards. Is it true? He asked. About Kansas? Anna looked at him. She owed him the truth. I worked in a saloon, she whispered. I sang, and the owner, Silas, he thought he owned me. He locked me in a room. He was going to hurting me. I hit him with a bottle. I didn't mean to kill him. Cole, I swear, I just wanted to get away. Her voice cracked on the last word. I am not a bad person, she sobbed. I just wanted to be free. Cole listened, watching her face. He saw the raw terror, the exhaustion, the shame. He believed her. He knew what it was like to do a violent thing to survive. He made a decision. It was a crazy decision, one that would cost him his standing with Stockton, maybe his life. But looking at her, he knew he couldn't let her walk out into the snow alone. I have a place, he said. Anna looked up, sniffing. What? I have a homestead, up in the foothills, about 3 hours' ride. It isn't much, just a cabin and a few acres I bought with my wages. I was saving it for, well, I don't know what for, but it has a roof and a stove. He took a step closer, his one good eye intense. You can come with me. Anna froze. You mean, live with you? Cole held up a hand. Not like that. I swear to you. Anna, not like that. You can cook, help with the chores. It is out of Stockton's reach. He doesn't own that land. You would be safe there. Anna hesitated. The fear was automatic. To go with a man, alone, to a cabin in the middle of nowhere. It was madness. It was walking into a trap. But then she looked at him. She looked at the battered face of the man who had stood between her and the storm, who had fought a roomful of men for her honor, who had held her in the hayloft and not touched her. I promise you, Cole said, his voice low and solemn. I won't touch you, not unless you ask. You can have the bed. I will sleep on the floor. You can leave whenever you want. Just don't go out on the road. The road will kill you. Anna. He extended his hand. It was the same gesture he had made at the stagecoach, a rough, calloused hand offering a lifeline. Anna looked at the hand. She looked at the cold stove that was no longer hers. She realized she was standing on the edge of a cliff. She could fall, or she could jump and pray he caught her. She took a trembling breath. Okay, she whispered. Cole didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed. He nodded once. Grab your bag. My horse is out back. Anna reached out and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. It terrified her. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. But as she walked out into the snow with him, leaving Redemption Creek behind, she felt a strange, wild hope fluttering in her chest. Everything was about to change. The climb into the foothills took the better part of the afternoon. The horses labored through drifts of snow that had not yet crusted over, their breath huffing in rhythmic gray plumes against the biting air. Cole Brannan led the way, his hat pulled low, his shoulders hunched against the wind. Anna Ward rode behind him on an old mare he had borrowed from the livery, clutching the pommel of the saddle as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. As they ascended, the landscape shifted from the flat, oppressed plains of Redemption Creek, to something wilder and more broken. The ground rose in jagged swells of granite and frozen earth. Pines began to appear, dark and twisted, clinging to the rock faces like desperate fingers. The wind here did not just blow, it sang through the needles, a high, lonely sound that made the silence beneath it feel vast. They crested a ridge as the sun began to dip behind the peaks, casting long, bruised shadows across the snow. There, Cole said, pulling his horse up and pointing with a gloved hand. Below them, tucked into a fold of the land where a narrow creek cut a black line through the white ground, stood a cabin. It was small, built of rough-hewn logs that had grayed with age. A stone chimney listed slightly to the south, stained black with soot. A sagging porch ran the length of the front, sheltering a stack of firewood that looked dangerously low. It is not a palace, Cole said, his voice rough, but the roof holds against the snow. To Anna, it looked like the end of the world. It looked like a place where a person could disappear so completely that even God might lose track of them. And for the first time in 3 years, that thought did not terrify her. They rode down in silence. The air grew colder as they descended into the shadow of the valley. When they reached the cabin, Cole dismounted stiffly, wincing as his boots hit the frozen ground. His face was still swollen from the fight in the dining room, the purple bruising around his eyes stark against his pale skin. He helped her down. His hands were careful, barely gripping her waist, releasing her the moment her feet touched the earth. Go inside, he said. The door sticks. You have to lift it by the handle. I will see to the horses. The interior of the cabin was freezing, colder even than the air outside because the damp had settled into the logs. It smelled of wood ash, cured leather, and neglect. Anna found a tin of matches on the mantel and knelt before the hearth. Her hands shook as she struck the match. But soon a small fire was crackling, feeding on dry pine needles and kindling, as the yellow light flickered against the walls, revealing a single room with a dirt floor, a rough table, and a narrow rope bed in the corner. Anna sat back on her heels. The distance from town pressed against the walls, They were miles from the nearest judgment, miles from the nearest whisper. It felt like safety. It felt like exile. The first few days were a study in awkwardness. The cabin was too small for two people who were trying so hard not to touch each other. They moved around the single room like repelling magnets. If Anna moved to the stove to stir the beans, Cole would retreat to the door to mend a bridle. If Cole came to the fire to warm his hands, Anna would suddenly find a task that required her to be on the far side of the room. They spoke in short, polite sentences, terrified of breaking the fragile truce they had established. "I will fetch the water," Cole would say. "Grabbing the buckets, I can do it," Anna would protest. "Reaching for them, the buckets are heavy with ice," he would counter, his hand brushing hers by accident before jerking away. "Let me earn my keep." At night, the tension was a physical thing. The cabin had only the one narrow bed, pushed into the corner farthest from the drafty door. The first night, Cole had pointed to it. "You take the bunk," he said. "I will not," Anna answered, her chin setting in a stubborn line. "You are the one who took a beating for me. You are the one with the bad shoulder. I will take the pallet by the fire. It is warmer there anyway." They argued for 10 minutes, standing in the dim light, until Cole finally threw his hands up in defeat. He was too sore and too tired to fight her. "Suit yourself," he grumbled. "But if you freeze, don't say I didn't offer." So they settled into a strange, disjointed rhythm. Cole slept on the bed, turning his face to the wall. Anna slept on a pile of blankets and hay near the hearth, listening to the logs pop and hiss. Outside, the wind prowled around the corners of the cabin, testing the chinking. In the distance, coyotes yipped and howled, their voices shrill and ghostly. Anna would lie awake, staring at the firelight dancing on the ceiling beams. She was hyper-aware of the man breathing in the darkness just 10 feet away. She listened to the rustle of his straw mattress, the heavy sigh of his sleep. She knew he was keeping his promise. He never reached for her. He never looked at her with that ownership she had seen in Stockton's eyes. When she changed her dress or washed with a basin of warmed water, she would hang a blanket over a rope strung across the room. Cole would immediately turn his back, busying himself with oiling his gun or whittling a piece of wood, never glancing toward her silhouette. This restraint, meant to comfort her, had a strange effect. It made her see him. She watched him when he didn't know she was looking. She watched him through the dusty window as he chopped wood in the yard. She saw the way his shoulders bunched under his shirt as he swung the axe, the fluid power of his back. She saw the way he paused to wipe sweat from his forehead with his forearm, his breath steaming in the cold air. She watched his hands in the evenings. They were large hands, scarred and battered, with knuckles that had been broken and healed crooked, but they were gentle. She watched him mend a tear in his saddle leather, the needle moving with surprising precision. She remembered how those hands had felt when they lifted her from the snow, how they had felt when they held the bucket with her. She began to crave the sound of his voice. It was a low rasp, like rocks tumbling in a riverbed. One evening, a week after they arrived, a blizzard howled outside, sealing them in. Dinner was a meager affair of navy beans boiled with salt pork and a dense square of cornbread Anna had baked in the Dutch oven. They sat at the small table, the lantern casting long shadows. "This is good bread," Cole said, breaking a piece. "Better than what I make. My cornbread could be used to shoe a horse." Anna smiled. "A small, genuine thing. It is just cornmeal and water." "Cole, it is hard to ruin. I have a talent for ruining things," he said, his eyes darkening slightly. He pushed his plate away and leaned back, the chair creaking. He looked at her, really looked at her, across the flame of the lantern. "You asked me once about the range wars," he said, "down in Lincoln County." Anna nodded. "You said you did things you weren't proud of." Cole picked up a spoon and turned it over in his fingers, watching the light play on the metal. "I was young," he began, "and I was hungry. A rancher named Tunstall offered $5 a day for men who could shoot straight and didn't ask questions. That was a king's ransom back then. So I took it." He paused, his jaw working. They called it a war, but it was just murder with a fancy name. We rode at night. We burned out small holders who wouldn't sell. We cut fences, and when the shooting started, he looked up, his gray eyes full of old ghosts. I killed men. Anna, some of them were bad men who would have killed me first, but some were just boys who were scared, holding a rifle because their boss told them to. I told myself it was just a job. I told myself I was a soldier. But at night, when the whiskey wore off, I knew I was just a hired killer. The weight of the confession hung heavy in the room. Anna looked at his hands, the hands that had killed, and then at his face, the face that was lined with the cost of it. She didn't see a monster. She saw a man who had carried a stone in his chest for 10 years. Why did you stop? She asked softly. I took a bullet in the shoulder, he said, touching the spot absently. Laid me up for a month in a boarding house not unlike Mrs. Bailey's. I had a lot of time to think. When I could ride again, I just kept riding north. I thought if I went far enough, I could outrun the things I saw. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Turns out, you pack your ghosts in your saddlebags. Anna reached across the table. It was an instinctive movement. She placed her hand over his, stopping the restless turning of the spoon. You are not that man anymore, she said fiercely. That man would not have stopped for me in the dust storm. That man would not have fought for me in the dining room. Cole looked down at her hand covering his. He didn't pull away. He turned his hand over slowly, interlacing his fingers with hers. His grip was warm and rough. Maybe, he whispered, or maybe I am just trying to balance the ledger. The next night, the wind died down, leaving a silence so profound it felt like the world was holding its breath. The fire was dying down to a bed of glowing coals. Anna sat on the hearthrug, her knees pulled to her chest. Cole was sitting on the bench, polishing his boots. The story of the saloon had been festering in her throat for days. Cole had told her his darkness. She knew she owed him hers, not the sanitized version she told the sheriff, but the truth. His name was Silas, she said into the silence. Cole stopped polishing. He didn't look up, but his stillness told her he was listening. He owned the golden slipper in Dodge, she continued, her voice trembling. He bought out my contract from a dance hall in St. Louis. He told me I would just be singing. That was a lie. She picked at a loose thread on her skirt. He treated the women like livestock. He had a book where he wrote down what we cost him in food and dress, and what we earned him in drinks and other things. He told us we could never leave until the debt was paid, but the debt never went down. He made sure of that. She closed her eyes, the memory washing over her. The smell of stale beer, the heat, the constant, grinding fear. Men would come in. Drunk men. Men who had been on the trail for months. They thought because they paid $1 for whiskey, they bought the right to touch. Silas encouraged it. He said a friendly girl sold more drinks. Anna took a shaky breath. That night, Silas was drunk. He had lost money at the faro table. He came into the dressing room. He was angry. He said I was holding out on him, that I wasn't friendly enough. He dragged me into the back room and locked the door. She heard the snap of the polishing cloth dropping to the floor. He grabbed me by the hair. She whispered. He threw me against the washstand. I saw the bottle. It was green glass. Cheap whiskey. I didn't think. I just grabbed it. When he came at me, I swung it. She opened her eyes, staring into the embers. It broke on his head. There was so much blood. He fell, heavy, like a sack of grain. He didn't move. I waited for him to get up and hit me, but he just lay there. And then I heard the shouting outside. I climbed out the window. I ran until my lungs burned. I could hear them behind me, shouting that I had killed him, that the deputy would hunt me down. She was shaking now, violent tremors that started in her core. I didn't mean to kill him. Cole, I just wanted him to stop touching me. Cole moved. He stood up from the bench and crossed the small space between them. He moved slowly, deliberately, making sure she saw him coming. He sat down on the hearthrug beside her, close but not touching, leaving a few inches of air between them. His hands were clenched into fists on his knees, his knuckles white. Anna turned her head to look at him. His face was a mask of controlled fury, but the anger wasn't directed at her. "He got what he earned," Cole said. His voice was low, vibrating with a dark intensity. "A man who corners a woman like that, he forfeits his right to breathe." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes fierce. "Defending your life doesn't make you evil, Anna, even if the law says otherwise, even if the whole damn world says otherwise. You did what you had to do to survive, just like I did." His words cracked something inside her chest. The hard shell of shame she had built around that night, the belief that she was dirty, that she was a murderer, began to fracture. He didn't blame her. He didn't see a whore. He saw a survivor. A sob ripped its way out of her throat. It was a raw, ugly sound. Tears spilled hot and fast down her cheeks. She leaned toward him. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was gravity. Cole hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then he opened his arms. Anna collapsed against him. She buried her face in the rough wool of his shirt, clutching at the fabric as if she were drowning. She cried for the fear, for the shame, for the long, lonely miles she had traveled. Cole's arms wrapped around her, firm and steady as iron bands. One hand pressed against her back, holding her together. The other came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. He rested his chin lightly on the top of her head. "I have got you," he murmured into her hair. "I have got you." She could feel the heat of his body seeping into hers, thawing the ice that had been in her veins for years. She smelled leather, wood smoke, and the scent of the man himself, something earthy and honest. It was a shelter. It was a fortress. They stayed like that for a long time, until the fire burned down to red coals and Anna's sobbing quieted to hitching breaths. But as the grief receded, something else rose to take its place. In the circle of his arms, the dynamic shifted. Anna became aware of the hardness of his chest against her cheek. She felt the heavy, rapid thud of his heart, beating in time with her own. She felt the rise and fall of his breath, uneven and shallow. She lifted her face. They were inches apart. The firelight cast deep shadows across his face, highlighting the scar and the intensity of his gaze. His eyes were dark, dilated, filled with a longing so profound it terrified her. But there was restraint there, too. He was holding himself back, waiting, terrified of frightening her. Anna's heart hammered against her ribs. The fear was still there, but it was blurring into something else, a powerful, aching desire that pulled at her belly. "I don't want to be afraid," she whispered, her voice trembling. Cole's gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. "Afraid of what?" "Of you," she said. "Of this, of wanting." The admission hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Cole's hand shifted from her hair to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, rough skin against soft. "I have wanted you since the moment I pulled you out of that dust storm," he rasped. His voice was rough, stripped of all pretense. "But I swore I would never be another man who took from you. I need you to tell me, Anna." He leaned in slightly, his forehead almost touching hers. "What do you want?" The question was a key unlocking a door she had kept bolted shut. What did she want? She wanted to stop running. She wanted to feel skin against skin without transactions, without force. She wanted to be held by a man who looked at her like she was precious, not like she was property. Anna raised her hand. Her fingers were shaking. She reached out and touched his jaw, tracing the white line of the scar that ran down to his lip. He closed his eyes at the contact, turning his face slightly into her palm. The simple intimacy of it made her whole body shiver. "I want to feel something that isn't shame," she whispered. "I want to feel your hands on me because I chose it." Cole opened his eyes. The restraint broke. He lowered his head. The first kiss was hesitant, a question asked and answered in the soft press of lips. He gave her room to pull away, keeping his touch light. But Anna didn't pull away. She made a small sound in her throat and leaned into him, her hands sliding up his chest to grip his shoulders. That small surrender shattered the last of the walls between them. The kiss deepened, becoming fierce and hungry. It was a collision of two lonely people who had been starving for years. Cole's arms tightened around her, pulling her flush against him. His mouth was hot and demanding, tasting of coffee and desire. Anna opened to him, gasping. The firelight flickered over them, casting wild shadows on the walls. She felt his hands moving over her back, sliding down to her waist, pulling her hips against his, but even in the heat of it, he was gentle. He cradled her face as if she were made of glass. Cole. She breathed against his mouth. He lifted her then, effortlessly, and carried her not to the pallet, but to the narrow bed in the corner. He laid her down on the rough blanket. He hovered over her, bracing his weight on his arms, looking down at her with a reverence that made her throat ache. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice strained. "Yes," she whispered. He lowered himself to her. The night became a blur of sensation, firelight and shadows, the roughness of his hands and the softness of his mouth. There was pain, the ghosts of old traumas trying to surface, but Cole was there to chase them away. He whispered to her, praising her, grounding her. When they finally came together, it wasn't just physical, it was a reclamation. Anna realized, with a shock of joy that nearly made her weep again, that her body was her own, and she could share it with whom she chose. They lay together afterward, limbs tangled, the fire burning low in the grate. The cabin was cold, but under the heavy blankets, wrapped in each other's arms. They were warm. Cole kissed her forehead, his arm heavy across her waist. "I never thought I would find this," he murmured, sleep dragging at his voice. "Neither did I," Anna replied. She lay awake for a while, listening to the wind. It sounded different now. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a song. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the cabin changed. The awkwardness evaporated, replaced by a deep, quiet connection. They worked side by side. Anna helped Cole repair the corral fence, holding the wire taut while he hammered the staples. He helped her knead dough for bread, his large hands clumsy but willing. They touched constantly, a hand on a shoulder, a brush of hips in the doorway, a stolen kiss by the frozen creek while they broke the ice for water. Anna still had nightmares. Sometimes she would wake up gasping, heart pounding, back in the locked room, but now she wasn't alone. Cole would pull her close, murmuring soothing nonsense until her breathing slowed. He was a solid anchor in the dark. They laughed more. They teased each other. They learned the map of each other's bodies and minds. It was a domesticity that felt stolen, fragile, and incredibly precious. But the world outside the valley had not forgotten them. Down in Redemption Creek, the snow was turning to gray slush. A stagecoach arrived, carrying two men who did not look like settlers. One was a deputy marshal from Kansas, a man with a hard face and a badge that gleamed dully on his coat. The other was a hired gun, a tracker with cold eyes who worked for the bounty. They went straight to the Stockton ranch. Stockton received them in his library. He listened to the deputy's story about the murdered saloon owner and the woman named Rose. He looked at the wanted poster. He smiled. "You have come a long way, gentlemen," Stockton said, pouring them drinks, "and I believe I can help you. The woman you are looking for, she is here, or near enough." He walked to the window, looking toward the foothills. "She is holed up in a cabin about 3 hours' ride north, with a former hand of mine, a man named Brannon." Stockton's eyes gleamed with malice. He saw a chance to kill two birds with one stone. He could destroy the woman who rejected him and the man who defied him. "She is dangerous," Stockton added smoothly. "And Brannon, he is a killer. You will need to be careful." He offered them fresh horses and supplies. He practically pushed them out the door, eager for the show to begin. Word travels fast in the West, even in winter. A day later, a rider appeared at the edge of the homestead clearing. It was Jimmy, a young ranch hand from the Stockton spread who had always looked up to Cole. Cole walked out to meet him, rifle in the crook of his arm. Anna stood on the porch, wiping flour from her hands, dread pooling in her stomach. "Cole," Jimmy said, his horse dancing nervously. "You need to know, there is a deputy in town. From Kansas." Cole went still. "He has got a hired gun with him." Jimmy continued. "And Stockton told them exactly where you are. They are coming. Cole, maybe tomorrow. Maybe the day after. But they are coming." Cole nodded grimly. "Thanks. Jimmy, you best ride back before you're missed." He watched the boy ride away, then turned to look at the cabin. Anna was standing by the door. She had heard. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with the old fear. Cole walked up the steps and took her hands. They were cold. "He is here," she whispered. Cole pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. He looked out at the jagged tree line, at the peaceful valley that had been their sanctuary. He knew the dream was over. "We can run," Anna said into his chest. "We can pack now. Go over the pass." Cole shook his head slowly. He pulled back to look at her. "No, Anna, we can't run. Not in this snow. And even if we made it, they would just keep coming. Pook, the deputy, Stockton, they won't stop. If we run now, we run for the rest of our lives. We will be looking over our shoulders every time a twig snaps." He reached up and cupped her face. "I want a life with you, Anna. A real life, not a life on the run." Tears welled in her eyes. "What do we do?" "We stop hiding," Cole said, his voice hard as flint. "We stand our ground, we face them, and we make them realize that dragging you back to the dark is going to cost them more than they are willing to pay." He kissed her forehead, a seal on a dangerous promise. "Go inside, load the rifles." The heavy silence of winter began to crack, not with the song of birds, but with the groan of the earth waking up. The snow, which had been a clean white blanket over the sins of the territory, turned into a gray, sucking mud that pulled at boots and hooves. The creek below the cabin, once a frozen ribbon, swelled into a brown torrent, chewing at its banks with a ravenous hunger. The thaw brought no relief to the cabin in the foothills. Instead, it brought a sharper, wetter cold that seeped through the chinking of the logs. The homestead, which had felt like a sanctuary during the deep freeze, now felt like a trap. Every snap of a twig in the forest sounded like a boot step. Every shift of the wind sounded like a rider approaching. Cole Brannon and Anna Ward lived with their rifles within arm's reach. They moved through the days with the grim efficiency of soldiers waiting for a siege. Cole spent hours cleaning the Winchester repeater, oiling the action until it racked with a smooth, deadly click. He taught Anna how to load the heavy buffalo gun, how to brace the stock against her shoulder so the recoil wouldn't dislocate the bone, and how to aim not for the head, but for the center of the chest. "If they come," Cole told her, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "You don't hesitate. You don't ask questions. You pull the trigger until the gun is empty." Anna listened, her hands stained with gun oil. She looked at the weapon, a machine made of iron and wood designed to tear through flesh, and she felt a sickness in her stomach. But she also felt a cold, hard resolve. She had run from Kansas. She had run from the saloon. She was done running. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the sky the color of a dirty slate. When the waiting ended, Anna was at the window, watching the tree line. When she saw them, 4 riders emerged from the pines, their horses stepping high through the mud. They wore long duster coats that flapped in the wind like the wings of carrion birds. "Cole," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the small room like a shout. Cole was at her side in a second, peering through the glass. He swore softly. "It is them," he said. "That is the deputy in the lead, the one with the silver on his saddle. The man beside him, that is a hired gun. I can tell by the way he rides. The other 2 are Stockton's boys." He turned to her, gripping her shoulders hard. "Stay inside. Stay away from the windows. If I go down, you bar the door and you don't open it for anyone but me. Do you understand? I am not letting you go out there alone," Anna protested, clutching his sleeve. "You have to," Cole said, his gray eyes fierce. "If we are both out there, they will flank us. Cover the door." He picked up his rifle and stepped out onto the sagging porch. The riders pulled up 20 yards from the cabin. The lead man, the deputy, was a scarecrow of a figure with a face like a hatchet. He sat comfortably in his saddle, confident in the authority of the badge pinned to his coat. The man beside him, the hired gun, sat perfectly still, his hands resting near the revolvers at his hips. Cole stood with his feet apart, the rifle held low across his body, not aimed but ready to rise in a heartbeat. "That is close enough," Cole called out. The deputy smiled. It was a tight, joyless expression. "You must be Brennan," the deputy said. His voice was high and reedy. "Stockton told me you were a stubborn son of a bitch. I am Deputy Marshal Kincaid, from Dodge City. I am here for the woman. She has a name," Cole said. "She has a warrant," Kincaid countered. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, waving it in the damp air. "Murder, theft, flight to avoid prosecution. Her name is Rose, and she is coming with me." "She is not going anywhere with you," Cole said. "Not without a hearing before a circuit judge. I know how the law works. Deputy, you don't just drag people across state lines on the word of a dead man." Kincaid laughed. "Out here, the law is what I say it is. And Mr. Stockton has been very clear. He wants this trash cleaned out of his hills. Now, you can hand her over, and maybe I will forget you are harboring a fugitive. Or we can burn this shack down with both of you inside." Inside the cabin, Anna pressed her back against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. She heard every word. Trash, fugitive, burn. The old names, the old threats. One of Stockton's men, a young hand with more arrogance than sense, grew impatient. "We ain't got all day to jaw with a traitor," the hand shouted. He made a mistake. He reached for his gun while Cole was still looking at him. Cole moved with a speed that defied his size. The Winchester snapped up. "Crack!" the ranch hand yelled, clutching his shoulder as the impact of the bullet knocked him clean out of the saddle. He hit the mud with a wet thud. The world exploded into noise. The hired gun drew both pistols and opened fire. Bullets chewed into the wood of the porch railing, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. Cole threw himself behind the support post, working the lever of his rifle. He fired back, the shots deafening in the valley. Anna screamed as a bullet punched through the window glass, shattering a jar on the table. She dropped to the floor, crawling toward the buffalo gun Cole had left by the door. Outside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of cordite. Cole fired again, hitting the dirt near the hired gun's horse, causing the animal to rear and spoil the man's aim. "Give it up, Brannon!" Kincaid screamed, firing his revolver blindly toward the porch. "You are dead men!" Cole leaned out to take a shot, but Kincaid was faster than he looked. A bullet grazed Cole's shoulder, tearing through the heavy sheepskin coat and carving a furrow across his deltoid. Cole grunted, the impact spinning him around. He dropped to one knee, blood instantly blooming dark and hot on his sleeve. "Cole!" Anna shouted, hearing his cry. She scrambled to the door and threw it open. She raised the heavy buffalo gun, resting the barrel on the doorframe. She didn't aim for a person. She aimed for the sky and pulled the trigger. The boom of the big gun was like a cannon shot. It echoed off the granite cliffs, a terrifying roar that stopped the shooting instantly. The horses panicked. Kincaid's mount bucked, nearly unseating him. The hired gun fought to control his animal. "Let's go!" Kincaid shouted to his men. "Pull back! Regroup in the trees!" They wheeled their horses around, dragging the wounded ranch hand up onto his mount, and galloped back toward the tree line, disappearing into the gray mist. Cole stayed kneeling on the porch, clutching his shoulder. Blood was leaking between his fingers, dripping onto the frozen mud. Anna dropped the gun and ran to him. "Cole! Oh God, Cole!" He looked up at her, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "They are just regrouping," he rasped. His teeth gritted against the pain. "They will circle back. They will wait for dark and torch the place." He tried to stand and swayed. Anna caught him, taking his weight. "We can't stay here," she said, panic rising in her throat. "No," he agreed. We can't hold them off alone, not with me winged. He looked at her, his eyes clearing with sudden resolve. Get the horses. Anna, we are going to town. Town? She asked, shocked. That is where they want us. Stockton is there. If we die here, nobody sees it, Cole said. They bury us in the mud and write whatever story they want. If we go to town, we force them to do it in front of witnesses. Get the horses. The ride to Redemption Creek was a blur of agony and fear. The dusk settled over the land like a shroud, turning the road into a tunnel of shadows. Anna rode close to Cole, reaching out every few minutes to steady him in the saddle. He was losing blood. She could see it soaking the entire left side of his coat. He rode, slumped over, his hand gripping the horn so tight his knuckles were white. They reached the outskirts of town just as night fully descended. The windows of the buildings glowed with yellow lamplight, warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, bloody reality of the riders. They rode down Main Street. The clip-clop of the hooves drew attention. People stopped on the boardwalks. Men stepped out of the saloon. They made a wretched pair. The fallen woman with her hair wild and wind-blown, leading the horse of a battered, bleeding cowboy. Anna felt the eyes of the town on her. She felt the judgment, heavy and suffocating. Look at her. Look at what she brought to us. Trouble. But she didn't look down. She kept her chin high, her jaw set. She was done hiding. She led the horses straight to the doctor's office, a small white building next to the general store. She slid from her saddle and helped Cole down. He nearly collapsed, his legs giving out. But she got her shoulder under his good arm and half-dragged him up the steps. "Doctor!" she screamed, kicking the door. "Dr. Evans!" The door opened. Dr. Evans, an older man with wire-rimmed spectacles and whiskey on his breath, looked at them in shock. "Good Lord," he muttered. "Bring him in." They got Cole onto the examination table. The doctor cut away the ruined coat and shirt. The wound was ugly, a deep gash across the muscle, but it hadn't hit the bone or the lung. As the doctor began to clean the wound with alcohol, causing Cole to hiss through his teeth, the door to the office banged open. There she is. It was Deputy Kincaid. He had ridden hard to catch up. Behind him stood Stockton, looking furious, and the sheriff, looking nervous. A crowd began to gather in the street, drawn by the shouting, shopkeepers, wives, ranch hands, the people who had whispered about Anna for months. Kincaid strode into the room, his gun drawn. "Step away from him," he ordered Anna. Anna didn't move. She stood between Cole and the deputy, her hands empty but her stance defiant. "You are under arrest," Kincaid spat, "for murder, and for the attempted murder of a law officer." Stockton stepped forward, playing to the crowd that was spilling into the doorway. "You see," Stockton boomed, his voice echoing in the small room. "I told you all what she was, a killer, a whore. She has dragged a good man like Cole Brannan down into the mud with her. She has been lying to you all since the day she arrived." The crowd murmured. Anna heard the words shame and sin rippling through them like a current. The deputy reached for a pair of iron shackles at his belt. "Put your hands out, girl." Anna took a step back. She looked at Kincaid. She looked at Stockton. Then she looked past them, at the faces of the townswomen huddled in the doorway. Mrs. Bailey was there, the baker's wife, the women who had turned their backs on her. "No," Anna said. The room went silent. "No?" Stockton laughed, a harsh bark. "You don't get to say no to the law." "I am not speaking to the law," Anna said, her voice shaking at first, then gaining strength. "I am speaking to the truth." She turned to face the crowd. "My name is Rose." She said clearly, "It is true. I worked at the Golden Slipper in Kansas. I sang for my supper, and yes, a man died there. She saw the women flinch, but she pressed on. His name was Silas. He owned the place. He owned the chairs, the tables, and the women. He thought he bought us when he paid our train fare." She took a breath, the air in the room thick and still. "That night, he locked me in a back room. He was drunk. He told me I hadn't earned my keep. He put his hands on me, Not to hold me, to hurt me, to take what he thought was his property. She looked directly at Mrs. Bailey. I broke a bottle on his head. I didn't want him to die. I just wanted him to stop. I ran because I knew men like him own the law in places like that. I ran because nobody listens to a saloon girl when a rich man ends up dead. She pointed a trembling finger at Stockton. Just like nobody listens here. Mr. Stockton offered to make my warrant disappear if I came to his ranch. If I warmed his bed. When I said no, suddenly I was a dangerous criminal. Liar, Stockton shouted, his face turning red. She is lying to save her neck. Cole sat up on the table. He was pale as a sheet, blood seeping through the fresh bandages, but his voice was granite. She is telling the truth. Cole slid off the table, swaying. He pushed Anna gently aside so he could stand next to her. He draped his good arm around her shoulders, his weight heavy and protective. You all know me, Cole said to the room. I have lived here 5 years. I have ridden for the Circle Slash. I have done Stockton's work. He looked at the sheriff. I was a hired gun before I came here. I fought in the range wars. I scared off settlers so Stockton could graze his cattle on free land. I burned barns. I beat men who wouldn't sell. The crowd gasped. Stockton looked ready to kill. If you are looking for a criminal, Cole said, looking at the townspeople, I am right here. I did it for money. I did it for the brand. But this woman, she fought for her life. She fought because she refused to be owned. And if that is a crime in this town, then you better arrest every woman who ever tried to say no to a man with a heavy hand. The silence that followed was profound. The moral certainty of the town began to fracture. The preacher, standing in the back, looked down at his Bible. Troubled, Mrs. Bailey stepped forward, her face set in grim lines. She worked in my kitchen for months. Mrs. Bailey said, she worked harder than any man I know. She never stole a crumb. She was kind to the cat. That doesn't sound like a murderer to me. A young ranch hand. One of the men who had been in the saloon fight took off his hat. My sister works in a hotel in St. Louis. He muttered, I would hope she would fight back too. Stockton saw the tide turning. He turned on the sheriff. Sheriff Miller, do your job. Arrest this woman. She is a fugitive with a warrant. The sheriff looked at Stockton, then at Cole, then at the crowd. He wiped sweat from his upper lip. I have to hold her. Mr. Stockton, if there is a warrant, until the circuit judge comes. Lock her up, Kincaid demanded. I will put her in the jail, the sheriff stammered. But nobody touches her. She stays there until the judge arrives next week. Stockton stepped close to the sheriff. You better make sure that lock is tight, Miller, because accidents happen in jail cells. Cole tightened his grip on Anna. I am going with her. No, you ain't, Kincaid sneered, before the violence could erupt again. A scream cut through the night from the street outside. Fire! Fire at the ranch! The cry was picked up by others. The crowd turned. Through the open door, a red glow was visible in the distance, lighting up the southern sky. Stockton's face went slack. My barn, he whispered, the hay barn. The wind was picking up, blowing the sparks toward the edge of town. The wooden buildings of Redemption Creek were dry as tinder after the long winter freeze. It is spreading, someone yelled. It is heading for the Widow Hennessy's place. The mood in the room shifted instantly from judgment to panic. In the West, fire was the great equalizer. It didn't care about warrants or morals. It ate everything. Get the buckets, the sheriff shouted. Forgetting the arrest, get the line moving. The crowd dissolved into chaos, rushing out into the street. Stockton ran for his horse, screaming for his men. In the confusion, Kincaid saw his chance. He grabbed Anna's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. Come on, you little witch. We are going to the jail while everyone is busy. He yanked her toward the door. Cole, weak from blood loss, stumbled as he tried to stop him. Let her go, Cole roared. Kincaid turned and backhanded Cole across the face. Cole fell hard, hitting his wounded shoulder. He groaned, vision graying out. Kincaid dragged Anna out into the muddy street. The air was thick with smoke and flying embers. The orange light of the fire cast hellish shadows against the buildings. "You think you can embarrass me?" Kincaid hissed, pulling her through the mud. "You think you can shame Mr. Stockton? I'm going to make sure you never see a judge." Cole stumbled out of the doctor's office. He saw Kincaid dragging Anna toward the alleyway next to the jail, the dark side, away from the bucket line. Adrenaline surged through Cole, overriding the pain. He launched himself. He hit Kincaid from behind, tackling him into the muck. They rolled in the slush, a tangle of limbs and coats. Kincaid was uninjured, but Cole was fighting with the desperation of a dying man. Kincaid drew his revolver. Cole grabbed the barrel, wrestling it away. The gun went off. Bang! The shot going wild into the dirt. Cole slammed Kincaid's wrist against a rock. The gun skittered away across the boardwalk, landing near Anna's feet. Kincaid kicked Cole in the chest. Throwing him off, he scrambled to his feet, reaching for a knife in his boot. Anna stood there. The heavy Colt revolver lay in the mud, inches from her toe. She looked at Kincaid, who was advancing on Cole. Cole was on his back, gasping, too weak to rise. Anna grabbed the gun. She brought it up with both hands, the heavy iron trembling. She cocked the hammer. The click was loud enough to be heard over the fire. "Stop!" she screamed. Kincaid froze. He looked at her, seeing the barrel leveled at his chest. He saw the look in her eyes, the same look she must have had in the saloon. "Go ahead," Kincaid sneered, holding up his hands but inching forward. "Shoot a lawman, then they will hang you for sure." Every instinct in Anna's body screamed to pull the trigger. It would be so easy. One squeeze, and the man who hunted her, the man who called her a whore, would be gone. The nightmare would end. Cole looked up from the mud. "Anna?" His voice was quiet. "Don't do it. Anna, you don't have to be what they say you are. If you kill him like this, he wins." Anna's finger tightened on the trigger. She hated him. She hated the power he held. But she looked at Cole, bleeding in the mud for her. She looked at the fire raging down the street, threatening the homes of the people who had judged her. She took a shuddering breath. She didn't lower the gun, but she didn't fire. "I want a hearing," she said, her voice steel. "I want a judge. And you are going to stand there until the sheriff comes back." Kincaid sneered and lunged, but he didn't reach her. The sheriff, running back for buckets, rounded the corner. He saw the gun. He saw Kincaid attacking a woman who was holding him at bay. "Hold it!" the sheriff yelled, drawing his own weapon. The standoff broke. Kincaid backed off, spitting on the ground. "This ain't over." "Rose!" The fire roared louder. The roof of the livery stable caught a spark. "We need hands! Missus!" Bailey shouted from the street. "The bucket line is breaking!" Cole pulled himself up, using the boardwalk railing. He looked at Anna. He took the gun from her gently and handed it to the sheriff. "Keep him here," Cole told the sheriff, pointing at Kincaid. Then he looked at Anna. "We have to help." "Why?" Anna asked, tears streaking the soot on her face. "They hate us." "Because we live here," Cole said. They joined the line. For the next 4 hours, there was no law, no warrants, no pasts. There was only the fire. Anna stood shoulder to shoulder with the banker's wife, passing heavy buckets of water until her arms screamed in agony. Her dress was soaked, her boots ruined. Cole worked like a man possessed. Despite his shoulder, he climbed onto the roof of the widow Hennessy's house. He used an axe to chop away the burning shingles, stopping the fire from spreading to the bedroom where the widow's children were sleeping. At one point, a burning beam collapsed in the livery, pinning a ranch hand, one of Stockton's own men. The man screamed. Cole didn't hesitate. He rushed in, the heat searing his eyebrows. He got his shoulder under the beam and heaved, his face contorted with effort, lifting it just enough for Anna and the doctor to drag the man free. When the sun finally rose, the town of Redemption Creek was battered, smoking and stained with soot, but it was still standing. The fire had been stopped at the livery. Stockton's barn was a pile of ash, but the town remained. Exhausted, people slumped on the boardwalks. Anna sat on a crate, her head in her hands. She was black with soot, her hands blistered. Stockton rode into town. He had been fighting the fire at his own perimeter, but he had lost his winter feed. He was ruined for the season. He looked at the town, at the people who had survived without him. He looked at Cole and Anna, sitting together, alive. His rage boiled over. He needed someone to blame. "You!" Stockton roared, pointing at Anna. "You brought this! This is God's judgment on a town that harbors sinners!" He jumped from his horse and marched toward her. "I'm taking you myself," he declared, "since the law's too weak to do it." He grabbed Anna by the arm, jerking her up from the crate. "You are coming with me. We will see how much fight you have left when I drag you behind my wagon." Cole stood up. He swayed, his face gray with exhaustion, but his eyes were burning. "Let her go, Stockton." Stockton laughed. "Or what? You're half dead." "Brannon?" Cole didn't speak. He tackled Stockton. It wasn't a fight of skill. It was a brawl of exhaustion. They crashed into the mud. Stockton was fresh, but Cole was fighting for his life. He took a heavy punch to the jaw but didn't fall. He drove his shoulder into Stockton's stomach, driving the air out of him. Kincaid, seeing his paymaster in trouble, scrambled for his dropped gun which the sheriff had left on the boardwalk in the confusion. He snatched it up. "I will end this," Kincaid screamed. He aimed at Cole's back. Anna saw it. She opened her mouth to scream, but a hand reached out. It was the ranch hand, the one Cole had saved from the burning beam. He swung a shovel he had been using to beat out flames. The shovel hit Kincaid's arm just as he pulled the trigger. The gun jerked wild. Bang! The bullet didn't hit Cole. It didn't hit Anna. It hit the iron rim of a wagon wheel and ricocheted. Kincaid jerked back as if he had been punched. He looked down. A dark stain was spreading across his stomach. The ricochet had caught him in the gut. He dropped the gun. He fell to his knees, then face forward into the mud. The town went silent. Stockton froze. Cole's fist pulled back. He looked at the dead deputy. The doctor ran to Kincaid, rolled him over, and shook his head. "He is gone." Kincaid's lips moved, muttering a final, bitter curse at the woman who wouldn't die. Then he was still. Stockton scrambled backward, away from Cole. He stood up, looking at the circle of townsfolk. They weren't looking at him with fear anymore. They were looking at him with disgust. "She killed him," Stockton shouted, pointing at Anna. "It is her fault. He shot himself." The ranch hand with the shovel said quietly, "I saw it. It was an accident." Stockton looked around. He saw the sheriff, hand on his gun, shaking his head. He saw Mrs. Bailey, arms crossed. He saw the faces of men whose homes Cole Brannon had helped save. "I want justice," Stockton screamed, his voice cracking. "She is a whore. She is a murderer. Hang her." The moment hung in the air, heavy as smoke. It was the tipping point, the fragile line between the rope and the gavel. Cole stepped back to Anna's side. He took her hand. It was soot-stained and trembling. "There will be no hanging," Cole said, his voice raspy but filling the street. He looked at the sheriff. "Lock us up if you have to. Miller. But we wait for the judge." The sheriff looked at Stockton, then at the dead deputy. He holstered his gun. "Get inside," the sheriff said to Cole and Anna. "Both of you, into the cell, for your own protection." As they walked toward the jail, Anna looked back. Stockton stood alone in the mud, a king without a kingdom, watching his power turn to ash in the morning light. The morning sun did not bring warmth to Redemption Creek. It brought only a harsh, unforgiving light that exposed every scar the night had left behind. The town smelled of wet ash and scorched timber, a pungent scent that hung heavy in the still air. Smoke still curled lazily from the blackened skeleton of the livery stable roof and the ruins of the Stockton hay barn on the outskirts, rising in thin gray ribbons to join the washed-out blue of the sky. People moved through the mud with the slow, heavy gait of the exhausted. Men leaned on shovels, their face streaked with soot and sweat, eyes hollow from a sleepless night of fighting flames. Women swept water and debris from boardwalks that were charred at the edges. The land around the settlement looked bruised. The snow trampled into a slurry of mud and charcoal. In the distance, the mountains stood indifferent. their white peaks shining with a terrible, distant beauty that offered no comfort to the struggles of the people below. The church bell began to toll at 9 o'clock. It was a flat, clanging sound that did not call the faithful to prayer, but the citizens to judgment. The preacher, a man named Reverend Thomas, whose hands were as calloused as any rancher's, had called the meeting. The rough-hewn building was packed beyond its capacity. Ranch hands stood shoulder to shoulder with shopkeepers. Boarding house guests squeezed onto benches beside mothers clutching fretful children. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp coats, unwashed bodies, and fear. Anna Ward and Cole Brannon sat near the front, on a bench that had been left curiously empty by the others. They did not touch, but their hands rested on the wood between them, inches apart. Cole sat stiffly, his shoulder heavily bandaged under a fresh shirt Mrs. Bailey had provided, his face pale beneath the bruising. Anna sat with her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. She felt the eyes of the town on her back, a physical weight that pressed down on her shoulders. At the front of the room, standing near the pulpit where the Bible lay open, was Stockton. The rancher looked like a man who had walked through hell and was looking for someone to blame for the heat. His left arm was in a sling from the fight, and a bandage covered a gash on his forehead. His eyes were red-rimmed and furious. "I demand she be turned over," Stockton shouted, his voice booming off the rafters. "We have waited long enough. That woman brought fire and death to this town. She is a fugitive, and by God, I will not stand here and watch you coddle her." Reverend Thomas raised a hand. "Mr. Stockton, this is a house of God. We will have order." "Order?" Stockton spat the word. "There is no order when a murderess walks free. The deputy is dead because of her. My barn is ashes because of her. If you people have lost your spines, I will finish this myself." He turned to the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the faces of men who owed him money, men who feared him. "And I will tell you this," Stockton continued, his voice dropping to a growl. "If this town sides with a whore against a man of property, I will pull every head of cattle I own out of this valley. I will stop my credit at the store. I will withdraw my funds from the bank. You will starve, all of you." A murmur of fear rippled through the room. Stockton owned Redemption Creek in all but name. To defy him was economic suicide. The sheriff stood up from the front row. He looked tired. He looked smaller than he usually did, his badge dull in the morning light. "Mr. Stockton," the sheriff said, his voice wavering slightly. "Sit down." "Miller," Stockton snapped. "No," the sheriff said. He straightened his back. "No, I will not sit down." The room went quiet. "I have been thinking," the sheriff said, looking at his boots and then at the crowd. "About the deputy, about the warrant." He took a deep breath. "I never saw it." Stockton froze. "What did you say?" "I never saw the warrant," the sheriff repeated, louder this time. Kincaid waved a paper around. "Sure, but I never held it. I never read it. I took his word because he had a badge. And I took your word, Mr. Stockton, because you signed the checks." Stockton's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I am saying," the sheriff continued, doggedly, "that we have got no official paper. And with Kincaid dead, we have got no testimony." Dr. Evans stood up from the other side of the aisle. He cleaned his spectacles on his vest, looking weary. "I attended the deputy before he passed. The doctor said he was delirious. He cursed a lot, but he gave no dying declaration. He didn't name her as a killer in any way that would hold up in a court of law. He just spoke of vengeance. That is not evidence. That is hate." The preacher stepped forward, placing his hand on the pulpit. "Without papers," he said, his voice resonating. "All we have are stories, gossip, rumor." He looked out at his congregation. "Brothers and sisters, we came close to hanging a woman last night based on anger. If we start executing people on gossip alone, which one of you is safe? Which one of you doesn't have a secret someone could twist into a noose?" The argument that followed was chaotic. A man from the livery stood up, pointing a shaking finger at Anna. "Safe or not, look at her. She brings trouble. A woman like that. She attracts violence like sugar draws flies. We can't have her here. Mrs." Bailey stood up. She was a formidable woman, broad and imposing. And she glared the liveryman down. A woman like what? Silas? Mrs. Bailey demanded. A woman who scrubs floors until her knees bleed? A woman who hauled buckets for 4 hours last night to save your own roof while you were busy panicking? She turned to Anna, her expression softening. She could have ran. Mrs., Bailey said to the room. When the fire started, when the fighting started, she could have taken a horse and gone, but she stayed. She fought for this town. That counts for something. A silence fell. Then, from the back of the room, a young woman spoke up. She was the wife of a sodbuster, a quiet girl who rarely raised her voice. "If what she says is true," the young woman said, her voice trembling but clear. "About the man in the saloon. About him locking her in." She paused, looking at her hands. If men like that are never punished, if the law protects them just because they have money, maybe the world needs women like her to fight back. Maybe it is the only justice there is. Stockton looked around, seeing the doubt in the eyes of the people he thought he owned. He realized he was losing them. He turned his venom on the only target left. "And what about him?" Stockton roared, pointing at Cole. "You are going to listen to a hired killer, a man who took my money to burn out settlers in the Lincoln County War." He stepped toward Cole, sneering. "Tell them, Brannon, tell them about the blood on your hands. Tell them you are no better than the trash you are protecting." Cole stood up. He moved slowly. Pain etched into the lines around his eyes. He didn't look at Stockton. He looked at the town. "He is right," Cole said. His voice was rough, like gravel under a boot. "I did those things. I rode for money. I scared good people off their land. I shot men who were just trying to hold on to what was theirs." He looked down at Anna, who was watching him with wide, fearful eyes. He looked back at the crowd. "I have carried that weight for 10 years. I thought I was beyond saving. I thought a man like me didn't get a second chance." He took a breath, and for the first time, the town saw the vulnerability beneath the cowboy's hard exterior. "Then I met her. Anna didn't ask me for anything. She didn't care about my reputation. She just needed help. And helping her, it is the first time in my life I have felt clean. She makes me want to be the man I should have been a long time ago." He paused, his gray eyes sweeping the room. "If you want to hang a criminal, hang me. I have earned it. But leave her be. She has paid for her sins." The vulnerability in his voice, the raw honesty of a man known for his silence, broke the last of the tension. The crowd shifted. The anger drained away, replaced by a heavy, uncomfortable shame. "There is no judge here," the sheriff said finally, breaking the silence, "and I won't authorize a lynching." He looked at Stockton. "We wait," the sheriff said firmly. "The circuit judge is due through here in 3 weeks. Until then, nobody leaves." He pointed a finger at Cole and Anna. "You two go back to your homestead. You stay there. You come to town for supplies. But you don't leave the territory. If you are gone when the judge gets here, I will hunt you down myself." It was a fragile compromise. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't death. Stockton spat on the floor, turned on his heel, and stormed out of the church, the heavy door slamming behind him. Back at the homestead, the days bled into weeks. The thaw continued, turning the world into a landscape of dripping trees and mud. But inside the cabin, the atmosphere was one of suspended time. The weight of the waiting hung heavy in the air. Every rider on the ridge, every shift of the wind, made them tense. They were living on borrowed time, and they knew it. Cole's recovery was slow. The bullet wound in his shoulder was deep and prone to aching in the damp cold. His body was a map of the violence he had endured, the bruised ribs, the split lip, the old scars and the new. Anna tended to him with a devotion that went beyond duty. She changed his bandages, her hands gentle and cool against his feverish skin. She cooked rich broths to build his strength. She sat with him in the evenings, reading aloud from an old newspaper they had brought from town, her voice a soft murmur against the silence of the hills. They shared quiet meals. sitting across the small table as the lantern hissed. They shared long silences that were no longer awkward, but filled with a profound understanding. And, occasionally, there were bursts of laughter, at a burnt batch of biscuits, at the way the wind howled down the chimney like a perturbed ghost. These moments felt like stolen gifts, precious because they knew how easily they could be taken away. One night, a late winter storm blew in, rattling the cabin walls and making the timbers groan. The wind sounded like voices, like the shouting of a mob. Anna sat by the fire, her knees pulled to her chest. She was staring into the flames, her face pale. "He is going to send me back," she whispered. Cole looked up from the harness he was oiling. "Who?" "The judge," she said. She didn't look at him. "It doesn't matter what the sheriff says. It doesn't matter what the town thinks. The law is a book written by men like Stockton. My word, the word of a saloon girl. It will never outweigh the life of a businessman. They will hang me, Cole, or they will put me in a cage until I die." She turned to him, her eyes bright with tears. "I know how the world works. I have seen it." Cole set the harness aside. He stood up and crossed the room. He sat on the bench beside her, taking her hands in his. His fingers were rough, calloused from years of rope and wire, but they closed around hers with a tenderness that made her throat ache. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and fierce. He waited until she met his eyes. "I don't care what the book says. I don't care about the judge. I made you a promise." He squeezed her hands. "I won't let them take you alone." Anna searched his face. "You can't fight the whole world. Cole, I can try," he said. "And if the verdict goes against you, if they try to put irons on you, we fight our way out. We ride for Mexico. We ride for Canada. I don't care. But where you go, I go." The intensity of his promise crashed over her like a wave. It broke through the numbness she had carried for so long. For years, she had believed she was disposable. She was a thing to be used, to be rented, to be discarded when she was broken. But this man, this scarred, quiet, violent man, was willing to burn his life down just to stand beside her. Anna felt something inside her come fully alive, a painful, beautiful expansion of her heart. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. "Before I met you," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I thought I was only something to be used. I never thought I could be someone to be loved." Cole's breath hitched. He moved his hand to the back of her neck, his thumb stroking the soft skin there. "You are everything, Anna. You are the only good thing I have ever found." Anna let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. The desire she felt wasn't just physical. It was a desperate, aching need to be close to him, to merge her life with his so completely that nothing could tear them apart. "I want to live," she murmured against his skin. "I want time. I want nights that don't end in fear." She lifted her head, looking into his eyes. "I have never felt this way." She moaned softly, the words torn from the deepest part of her. "Even if the world hates me, what I feel with you, it makes it all bearable." Cole didn't speak. He couldn't. The raw honesty of her voice broke something open in him, shattering the last of his defenses. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperation that matched her own. He held her tightly, as if he could shield her from the judge, from the past, from the wind itself, just by the force of his will. Their embrace was slow and desperate, filled with all the words they couldn't find. It was a claiming. It was a defiance. In the shadow of the gallows, they chose each other. 3 weeks later, the circuit judge arrived. Judge Thaddeus Holloway was a man carved from old oak. He was tired, with wary eyes that had seen every variation of human cruelty and deceit. He rode into Redemption Creek on a mule, carrying a saddlebag full of law books and a reputation for fairness that bordered on harshness. He set up court in the church. There was no jury. In the territories, the judge was the law, the jury, and the executioner. The hearing lasted 2 days. Stockton testified first. He was bitter, his voice dripping with venom as he painted Anna as a seductress and a cold-blooded killer. But his anger worked against him. Judge Holloway watched him with cool detachment. noting the rancher's arrogance. Then Anna testified. She sat in the witness chair, her hands folded. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She told her story simply. She spoke of the locked room, the broken bottle, the fear. Judge Holloway leaned forward, watching her face. He was used to sorting lies from half-truths. And in Anna's halting voice, he heard the ring of trauma. Mrs. Bailey testified. Speaking of Anna's character, the sheriff admitted to the lack of paperwork. The doctor testified that Kincaid had been a man seeking bounty, not justice. On the third day, the judge gave his ruling. He sat behind a heavy oak table, shuffling his papers. The church was silent. Anna held Cole's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. "This court," Judge Holloway began, his voice dry as dust, "is not a saloon in Kansas. We deal in facts." He looked over his spectacles at Stockton. "The fact is, we have a dead man in another state and no witness to the crime. We have a dead deputy here who acted without a warrant. We have the testimony of a woman who claimed self-defense in the face of sexual violence." He paused, looking at Anna. "The law does not punish a woman for defending her virtue or her life, Mrs. Ward. However, running from the law creates a presumption of guilt. You should have stood your ground in Kansas." Anna lowered her head. "But," the judge continued, "I cannot extradite a citizen based on rumor, and I will not imprison a woman based on the word of a man like Mr. Stockton, whose motivations appear to be personal." He slammed his gavel down. "Case dismissed for lack of evidence. Mrs. Ward is free to go." The room erupted. Stockton roared in outrage, knocking over a bench. He stood up, his face purple. "This is a travesty," Stockton screamed. "You are letting a killer walk. Sit down, sir," the judge barked, "or I will hold you in contempt." Stockton looked around the room. He saw the relief on the faces of the townspeople. He saw Cole and Anna embracing, weeping. He realized he had lost his power, which relied on fear and absolute control, had been broken by a judge on a mule and a woman who wouldn't break. "I am done with this town," Stockton announced. "I am pulling my business. I am pulling my men. You people can rot in your own filth." He stormed out. True to his word, he left the next day, but not all his men went with him. Some of the ranch hands, tired of his cruelty and inspired by the stand Cole had taken, decided to stay. They found work on smaller spreads or took up claims of their own. Stockton's influence diminished, fading like a storm that had blown itself out. The change in the town was slow. It didn't happen overnight. Some people would always look at Anna and see the saloon girl. Some women would always cross the street to avoid her. But others began to greet her by name. The baker sold her fresh bread and asked about her garden. The blacksmith waved when they rode in. It was uneven, imperfect, but it was real. Spring finally broke the back of winter. The mud dried into hard earth. The creek ran clear over the stones. The hills turned a brilliant, impossible green. One quiet afternoon, Cole and Anna walked down to the creek below the cabin. The air smelled of sage and wet earth. Cole stopped by a large cottonwood tree. He took off his hat, turning it in his hands. He looked nervous, more nervous than he had been facing the deputy's gun. "Anna," he said. She stopped and turned to him. "Yes, I don't have much," Cole said. "You know that. I have got this land. I have got a bad shoulder and a past that isn't pretty." He looked her in the eye. "But I love you. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anything." He took a step closer. "I am asking if you would be willing to build something with me. Not just a cabin, a life. I can't promise it will be easy. It will be hard work. But I promise you will never carry a burden alone again." He took a breath. "Will you marry me?" Anna looked at him. She looked at the scars on his face, the gray eyes that had seen so much darkness and yet looked at her with such light. She thought about the shame she had carried for so long, the fear that she was damaged goods. But standing there, in the clear sunlight, the shame felt like an old coat she didn't need to wear anymore. She didn't choose fear. She chose hope. "Yes," she whispered. Cole let out a breath and pulled her to him. He kissed her, and the sound of the water running over the stones and the distant yip of a coyote were their only witnesses. The story closes not with a grand sunset, but with a quiet morning at the homestead. The roof of the cabin had been patched with new shingles. A garden plot had been turned, the dark earth ready for planting. A stray dog, a scruffy thing with one ear, lay asleep on the porch, thumping its tail in a dream. Anna stood on the porch, leaning against the railing. Cole came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. They watched the sun crest the peaks, lighting up the valley they had fought for. The future was uncertain. There would be droughts. There would be hard winters. There would be people who judged them. But as Anna leaned into Cole's side, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against her back, she realized the truth. The dark past she had hidden no longer defined her. She was not Rose. She was not a victim. What defined her now was this: the fierce, aching love they had built out of the wreckage. A love that had survived storms, gunfire, and judgment. A love that had been forged in the fire and cooled in the snow. It was enough. It was more than enough. And they would face whatever came next the way they faced everything else. Together. One hard, beautiful Western day at a time. Thank you truly for riding along on this journey through the dust and snow of Redemption Creek. Telling the story of Anna and Cole has been a pleasure, and I hope their fight for love and justice resonated with you. I would love to hear where you are listening from today. Are you tuning in from the busy streets of a city? Or perhaps somewhere quiet with a view of the hills? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the story in English. I read every one of them. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to From Wild West. There are many more stories to tell, of outlaws, heroes, and the untamed heart of the frontier. Until next time, keep your powder dry.